Chapter 1. The Magnet Attracting, a Waif Amid Forces. When Caroline Meeber boarded the afternoon train for Chicago, her total outfit consisted of a small trunk, a cheap imitation alligator skin satchel, a small lunch in a paper box, and a yellow leather snap purse containing her ticket, a scrap of paper with her sister's address in Van Buren Street, and $4 in money. It was August, 1889. She was 18 years of age, bright, timid, and full of the illusions of ignorance and youth. Whatever touch of regret at parting characterized her thoughts, it was certainly not for advantages now being given up. A gush of tears at her mother's farewell kiss, a touch in her throat when the cars clacked by the flour mill where her father worked by the day, a pathetic sigh as the familiar green environs of the village passed in review, and the threads which bound her so lightly to girlhood and home were irretrievably broken. To be sure, there was always the next station, where one might descend and return. There was the great city, bound more closely by these very trains which came up daily. Columbia City was not very far away, even when she was in Chicago. What, pray, is a few hours, a few hundred miles? She looked at the little slip bearing her sister's address, and wondered. She gazed at the green landscape, now passing in swift review, until her swifter thoughts replaced its impression with vague conjectures of what Chicago might be. When a girl leaves her home at 18, she does one of two things. Either she falls into saving hands and becomes better, or she rapidly assumes the cosmopolitan standard of virtue and becomes worse. Of an intermediate balance, under the circumstances, there is no possibility. The city has its cunning wiles, no less than the infinitely smaller and more human tempter. There are large forces which allure with all the soulfulness of expression possible in the most cultured human. The gleam of 1,000 lights is often as effective as the persuasive light in a wooing and fascinating eye. Half the undoing of the unsophisticated and natural mind is accomplished by forces wholly superhuman. A blare of sound, a roar of life, a vast array of human hives appeal to the astonished senses in equivocal terms. Without a counselor at hand to whisper cautious interpretations, what falsehoods may not these things breathe into the unguarded ear? Unrecognized for what they are, their beauty, like music, too often relaxes, then weakens, then perverts the simple human perceptions. Caroline, or Sister Carrie, as she had been half affectionately termed by the family, was possessed of a mind rudimentary in its power of observation and analysis. Self-interest with her was high, but not strong. It was, nevertheless, her guiding characteristic. Warm with the fancies of youth, pretty with the insipid prettiness of the formative period, possessed of a figure promising eventual shapeliness, and an eye alight with certain native intelligence, she was a fair example of the middle American class, 2 generations removed from the emigrant. Books were beyond her interest, knowledge a sealed book. In the intuitive graces she was still crude. She could scarcely toss her head gracefully. Her hands were almost ineffectual. The feet, though small, were set flatly. And yet she was interested in her charms, quick to understand the keener pleasures of life, ambitious to gain in material things. A half-equipped little knight she was, venturing to reconnoiter the mysterious city and dreaming wild dreams of some vague, far-off supremacy which should make it prey and subject, the proper penitent groveling at a woman's slipper. "That," said a voice in her ear, "is one of the prettiest little resorts in Wisconsin." "Is it?" she answered nervously. The train was just pulling out of Waukesha. For some time she had been conscious of a man behind. She felt him observing her mass of hair. He had been fidgeting, and with natural intuition she felt a certain interest growing in that quarter. Her maidenly reserve, and a certain sense of what was conventional under the circumstances, called her to forestall and deny this familiarity. But the daring and magnetism of the individual, born of past experiences and triumphs, prevailed. She answered. He leaned forward to put his elbows upon the back of her seat, and proceeded to make himself volubly agreeable. "Yes, that is a great resort for Chicago people. The hotels are swell. You are not familiar with this part of the country, are you?" "Oh, yes, I am," answered Carrie. "That is, I live at Columbia City. I have never been through here, though." "And so this is your first visit to Chicago?" he observed. All the time she was conscious of certain features out of the side of her eye. Flush, colorful cheeks, a light mustache, a gray fedora hat. She now turned and looked upon him in full, the instincts of self-protection and coquetry mingling confusedly in her brain. "I didn't say that," she said. "Oh," he answered in a very pleasing way, and with an assuming air of mistake. "I thought you did." Here was a type of the traveling canvasser for a manufacturing house, a class which at that time was first being dubbed by the slang of the day, drummers. He came within the meaning of a still newer term, which had sprung into general use among Americans in 1880, and which concisely expressed the thought of one whose dress or manners are calculated to elicit the admiration of susceptible young women, a masher. His suit was of a striped and crossed pattern of brown wool, new at that time, but since become familiar as a business suit. The low crotch of the vest revealed a stiff shirt bosom of white and pink stripes. From his coat sleeves protruded a pair of linen cuffs of the same pattern, fastened with large gold plate buttons, set with the common yellow agates known as cat's eyes. His fingers bore several rings, one the ever-enduring heavy seal, and from his vest dangled a neat gold watch-chain, from which was suspended the secret insignia of the Order of Elks. The whole suit was rather tight-fitting, and was finished off with heavy-soled tan shoes, highly polished, and the grey fedora hat. He was, for the order of intellect represented, attractive, and whatever he had to recommend him, you may be sure was not lost upon Carrie, in this her first glance. Lest this order of individuals should permanently pass, let me put down some of the most striking characteristics of his most successful manner and method. Good clothes, of course, were the first essential, the things without which he was nothing. A strong physical nature, actuated by a keen desire for the feminine, was the next. A mind free of any consideration of the problems or forces of the world, and actuated not by greed, but by an insatiable love of variable pleasure. His method was always simple. Its principal element was daring, backed, of course, by an intense desire and admiration for the sex. Let him meet with a young woman once, and he would approach her with an air of kindly familiarity, not unmixed with pleading, which would result in most cases in a tolerant acceptance. If she showed any tendency to coquetry, he would be apt to straighten her tie, or if she "took up" with him at all, to call her by her first name. If he visited a department store, it was to lounge familiarly over the counter and ask some leading questions. In more exclusive circles, on the train or in waiting stations, he went slower. If some seemingly vulnerable object appeared, he was all attention, to pass the compliments of the day, to lead the way to the parlor car, carrying her grip, or failing that, to take a seat next her, with the hope of being able to court her to her destination. Pillows, books, a footstool, the shade lowered, all these figured in the things which he could do. If, when she reached her destination, he did not alight and attend her baggage for her, it was because in his own estimation he had signally failed. A woman should some day write the complete philosophy of clothes. No matter how young, it is one of the things she wholly comprehends. There is an indescribably faint line in the matter of a man's apparel, which somehow divides for her those who are worth glancing at and those who are not. Once an individual has passed this faint line on the way downward, he will get no glance from her. There is another line at which the dress of a man will cause her to study her own. This line the individual at her elbow now marked for Carrie. She became conscious of an inequality. Her own plain blue dress, with its black cotton tape trimmings, now seemed to her shabby. She felt the worn state of her shoes. "Let's see," he went on. "I know quite a number of people in your town. Morgenroth, the clothier, and Gibson, the dry goods man." "Oh, do you?" she interrupted, aroused by memories of longings their show windows had cost her. At last he had a clue to her interest, and followed it deftly. In a few minutes he had come about into her seat. He talked of sales of clothing, his travels, Chicago, and the amusements of that city. "If you are going there, you will enjoy it immensely. Have you relatives?" "I am going to visit my sister," she explained. "You want to see Lincoln Park," he said, "and Michigan Boulevard. They're putting up great buildings there. It's a second New York. Great! So much to see. Theaters, crowds, fine houses. Oh, you'll like that." There was a little ache in her fancy of all he described. Her insignificance in the presence of so much magnificence faintly affected her. She realized that hers was not to be a round of pleasure. And yet there was something promising in all the material prospect he set forth. There was something satisfactory in the attention of this individual, with his good clothes. She could not help smiling as he told her of some popular actress of whom she reminded him. She was not silly, and yet attention of this sort had its weight. "You'll be in Chicago some little time, won't you?" he observed at one turn of the now easy conversation. "I don't know," said Carrie vaguely, a flash vision of the possibility of her not securing employment rising in her mind. "Several weeks, anyhow," he said, looking steadily into her eyes. There was much more passing now than the mere words indicated. He recognized the indescribable thing that made up for fascination and beauty in her. She realized that she was of interest to him, from the one standpoint which a woman both delights in and fears. Her manner was simple, though for the very reason that she had not yet learned the many little affectations with which women conceal their true feelings. Some things she did appeared bold. A clever companion, had she ever had one, would have warned her never to look a man in the eyes so steadily. "Why do you ask?" she said. "Well, I'm going to be there several weeks. I'm going to study stock at our place and get new samples. I might show you round." "I don't know whether you can or not. I don't know whether I can. I shall be living with my sister, and—" "Well, if she minds, we'll fix that." He took out his pencil and a little pocket notebook as if it were all settled. "What is your address there?" She fumbled in her purse, which contained the address slip. He reached down in his hip pocket and took out a fat purse. It was filled with slips of paper, some mileage books, a roll of greenbacks. It impressed her deeply. Such a purse had never been carried by anyone attentive to her. Indeed, an experienced traveller, a brisk man of the world, had never come within such close range before. The purse, the shiny tan shoes, the smart new suit, and the air with which he did things, built up for her a dim world of fortune, of which he was the centre. It disposed her pleasantly toward all he might do. He took out a neat business card, on which was engraved Bartlett, Carrie and Company, and down in the left-hand corner, Chas. H. Drouet. "That's me," he said, putting the card in her hand and touching his name. "It's pronounced Drouet. Our family was French on my father's side." She looked at it while he put up his purse. Then he got out a letter from a bunch in his coat pocket. "This is the house I travel for," he went on, pointing to a picture on it. "Corner of State and Lake." There was pride in his voice. He felt that it was something to be connected with such a place, and he made her feel that way. "What is your address?" he began again, fixing his pencil to write. "Carrie Meeber," she said slowly, 354 West Van Buren Street, care S.C. Hanson. He wrote it carefully down and got out the purse again. "You'll be at home if I come around Monday night?" he said. "I think so," she answered. How true it is that words are but the vague shadows of the volumes we mean. Little audible links they are, chaining together great inaudible feelings and purposes. Here were these two bandying little phrases, drawing purses, looking at cards, and both unconscious of how inarticulate all their real feelings were. Neither was wise enough to be sure of the working of the mind of the other. He could not tell how his luring succeeded. She could not realize that she was drifting, until he secured her address. Now she felt that she had yielded something, he that he had gained a victory. Already they felt that they were somehow associated. Already he took control in directing the conversation. His words were easy. Her manner was relaxed. They were nearing Chicago. Signs were everywhere numerous. Trains flashed by them. Across wide stretches of flat, open prairie they could see lines of telegraph poles stalking across the fields toward the great city. Far away were indications of suburban towns, some big smokestacks towering high in the air. Frequently there were two-story frame houses standing out in the open fields, without fence or trees, lone outposts of the approaching army of homes. To the child, the genius with imagination, or the wholly untraveled, the approach to a great city for the first time is a wonderful thing, particularly if it be evening, that mystic period between the glare and gloom of the world, when life is changing from one sphere or condition to another. Ah, the promise of the night! What does it not hold for the weary? What old illusion of hope is not here forever repeated? Says the soul of the toiler to itself, I shall soon be free. I shall be in the ways and the hosts of the merry. The streets, the lamps, the lighted chambers set for dining are for me. The theatre, the halls, the parties, the ways of rest and the paths of song, these are mine in the night. Though all humanity be still enclosed in the shops, the thrill runs abroad. It is in the air. The dullest feel something they may not always express or describe. It is the lifting of the burden of toil. Sister Carrie gazed out of the window. Her companion, affected by her wonder, so contagious are all things, felt anew some interest in the city, and pointed out its marvels. "This is northwest Chicago," said Drouet. "This is the Chicago River," and he pointed to a little muddy creek, crowded with huge masted wanderers from far-off waters, nosing the black-posted banks. With a puff, a clang, and a clatter of rails, it was gone. "Chicago is getting to be a great town," he went on. "It's a wonder. You'll find lots to see here." She did not hear this very well. Her heart was troubled by a kind of terror. The fact that she was alone, away from home, rushing into a great sea of life and endeavor, began to tell. She could not help but feel a little choked for breath, a little sick as her heart beat so fast. She half closed her eyes and tried to think it was nothing, that Columbia City was only a little way off. "Chicago! Chicago!" called the brakeman, slamming open the door. They were rushing into a more crowded yard, alive with the clatter and clang of life. She began to gather up her poor little grip and closed her hand firmly upon her purse. Drouet arose, kicked his legs to straighten his trousers, and seized his clean yellow grip. "I suppose your people will be here to meet you?" he said. "Let me carry your grip." "Oh, no," she said. "I'd rather you wouldn't. I'd rather you wouldn't be with me when I meet my sister." "All right," he said in all kindness. "I'll be near, though, in case she isn't here, and take you out there safely." "You're so kind," said Carrie, feeling the goodness of such attention in her strange situation. "Chicago!" called the brakeman, drawing the word out long. They were under a great shadowy train shed, where the lamps were already beginning to shine out, with passenger cars all about, and the train moving at a snail's pace. The people in the car were all up and crowding about the door. "Well, here we are," said Drouet, leading the way to the door. "Good-bye, till I see you Monday." "Good-bye," she answered, taking his proffered hand. "Remember, I'll be looking till you find your sister." She smiled into his eyes. They filed out, and he affected to take no notice of her. A lean-faced, rather commonplace woman recognized Carrie on the platform and hurried forward. "Why, Sister Carrie," she began, and there was a perfunctory embrace of welcome. Carrie realized the change of affectional atmosphere at once. Amid all the maze, uproar, and novelty, she felt cold reality taking her by the hand. No world of light and merriment, no round of amusement. Her sister carried with her most of the grimness of shift and toil. "Why, how are all the folks at home?" she began. "How is father and mother?" Carrie answered, but was looking away. Down the aisle toward the gate leading into the waiting room in the street stood Drouet. He was looking back. When he saw that she saw him and was safe with her sister, he turned to go, sending back the shadow of a smile. Only Carrie saw it. She felt something lost to her when he moved away. When he disappeared, she felt his absence thoroughly. With her sister she was much alone, a lone figure in a tossing, thoughtless sea. End of Chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carrie Bradfield. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 2. What Poverty Threatened of Granite and Brass. Minnie's flat, as the one-floor resident apartments were then being called, was in a part of West Van Buren Street inhabited by families of laborers and clerks, men who had come and were still coming, with the rush of population pouring in at the rate of 50,000 a year. It was on the third floor, the front windows looking down into the street, where, at night, the lights of grocery stores were shining and children were playing. To Carrie, the sound of the little bells upon the horse cars as they tinkled in and out of hearing was as pleasing as it was novel. She gazed into the lighted street when Minnie brought her into the front room and wondered at the sounds, the movement, the murmur of the vast city which stretched for miles and miles in every direction. Mrs. Hanson, after the first greetings were over, gave Carrie the baby and proceeded to get supper. Her husband asked a few questions and sat down to read the evening paper. He was a silent man, American-born of a Swede father, and now employed as a cleaner of refrigerator cars at the stockyards. To him, the presence or absence of his wife's sister was a matter of indifference. Her personal appearance did not affect him one way or the other. His one observation to the point was concerning the chances of work in Chicago. "It's a big place," he said. "You can get in somewhere in a few days. Everybody does." It had been tacitly understood beforehand that she was to get work and pay her board. He was of a clean, saving disposition, and had already paid a number of monthly installments on 2 lots far out on the west side. His ambition was some day to build a house on them. In the interval which marked the preparation of the meal, Carrie found time to study the flat. She had some slight gift of observation, and that sense, so rich in every woman, intuition. She felt the drag of a lean and narrow life. The walls of the rooms were discordantly papered. The floors were covered with matting, and the hall laid with a thin rag carpet. One could see that the furniture was of that poor, hurriedly patched-together quality sold by the installment houses. She sat with Minnie in the kitchen, holding the baby until it began to cry. Then she walked and sang to it, until Hanson, disturbed in his reading, came and took it. A pleasant side to his nature came out here. He was patient. One could see that he was very much wrapped up in his offspring. "Now, now," he said, walking. "There, there." And there was a certain Swedish accent noticeable in his voice. "You'll want to see the city first, won't you?" said Minnie, when they were eating. "Well, we'll go out Sunday and see Lincoln Park." Carrie noticed that Hanson had said nothing to this. He seemed to be thinking of something else. "Well," she said, "I think I'll look around tomorrow. I've got Friday and Saturday, and it won't be any trouble. Which way is the business part?" Minnie began to explain, but her husband took this part of the conversation to himself. "It's that way," he said, pointing east. "That's east." Then he went off into the longest speech he had yet indulged in, concerning the lay of Chicago. "You'd better look in those big manufacturing houses along Franklin Street and just the other side of the river," he concluded. "Lots of girls work there. You could get home easy, too. It isn't very far." Carrie nodded and asked her sister about the neighborhood. The latter talked in a subdued tone, telling the little she knew about it, while Hanson concerned himself with the baby. Finally he jumped up and handed the child to his wife. "I've got to get up early in the morning, so I'll go to bed." And off he went, disappearing into the dark little bedroom off the hall for the night. "He works way down at the stockyards," explained Minnie. "What time do you get up to get breakfast?" asked Carrie. "So he's got to get up at 5:30?" "At about 20 minutes of 5. Together they finished the labor of the day, Carrie washing the dishes while Minnie undressed the baby and put it to bed. Minnie's manner was one of trained industry, and Carrie could see that it was a steady round of toil with her. She began to see that her relations with Drouet would have to be abandoned. He could not come here. She read from the manner of Hanson, in the subdued air of Minnie, and, indeed, the whole atmosphere of the flat, a settled opposition to anything save a conservative round of toil. If Hanson sat every evening in the front room and read his paper, if he went to bed at 9 and Minnie a little later, what would they expect of her? She saw that she would first need to get work and establish herself on a paying basis before she could think of having company of any sort. Her little flirtation with Drouet seemed now an extraordinary thing. "No," she said to herself, "he can't come here." She asked Minnie for ink and paper, which were upon the mantel in the dining room, and when the latter had gone to bed at 10, got out Drouet's card and wrote him. "I cannot have you call on me here. You will have to wait until you hear from me again. My sister's place is so small." She troubled herself over what else to put in the letter. She wanted to make some reference to their relations upon the train, but was too timid. She concluded by thanking him for his kindness in a crude way, then puzzled over the formality of signing her name, and finally decided upon the severe, winding up with a "very truly," which she subsequently changed to "sincerely." She sealed and addressed the letter, and going in the front room, the alcove of which contained her bed, drew the one small rocking-chair up to the open window, and sat looking out upon the night and streets in silent wonder. Finally, wearied by her own reflections, she began to grow dull in her chair, and feeling the need of sleep, arranged her clothing for the night and went to bed. When she awoke at 8 the next morning, Hanson had gone. Her sister was busy in the dining room, which was also the sitting room, sewing. She worked, after dressing, to arrange a little breakfast for herself, and then advised with Minnie as to which way to look. The latter had changed considerably since Carrie had seen her. She was now a thin, though rugged, woman of 27, with ideas of life colored by her husband's, and fast hardening into narrower conceptions of pleasure and duty than had ever been hers in a thoroughly circumscribed youth. She had invited Carrie, not because she longed for her presence, but because the latter was dissatisfied at home and could probably get work and pay her board here. She was pleased to see her in a way, but reflected her husband's point of view in the matter of work. Anything was good enough so long as it paid, say, $5 a week to begin with. A shop girl was the destiny prefigured for the newcomer. She would get in one of the great shops and do well enough until something happened. Neither of them knew exactly what. They did not figure on promotion. They did not exactly count on marriage. Things would go on, though, in a dim kind of way until the better thing would eventuate, and Carrie would be rewarded for coming and toiling in the city. It was under such auspicious circumstances that she started out this morning to look for work. Before following her in her round of seeking, let us look at the sphere in which her future was to lie. In 1889, Chicago had the peculiar qualifications of growth which made such adventuresome pilgrimages, even on the part of young girls, plausible. Its many and growing commercial opportunities gave it widespread fame, which made of it a giant magnet, drawing to itself from all quarters the hopeful and the hopeless, those who had their fortune yet to make, and those whose fortunes and affairs had reached a disastrous climax elsewhere. It was a city of over 500,000, with the ambition, the daring, the activity of a metropolis of 1,000,000. Its streets and houses were already scattered over an area of 75 square miles. Its population was not so much thriving upon established commerce as upon the industries which prepared for the arrival of others. The sound of the hammer engaged upon the erection of new structures was everywhere heard. Great industries were moving in. The huge railroad corporations, which had long before recognized the prospects of the place, had seized upon vast tracts of land for transfer and shipping purposes. Streetcar lines had been extended far out into the open country in anticipation of rapid growth. The city had laid miles and miles of streets and sewers through regions where perhaps one solitary house stood out alone, a pioneer of the populous ways to be. There were regions open to the sweeping winds and rain, which were yet lighted throughout the night with long blinking lines of gas lamps fluttering in the wind. Narrow boardwalks extended out, passing here a house and there a store, at far intervals, eventually ending on the open prairie. In the central portion was the vast wholesale and shopping district, to which the uninformed seeker for work usually drifted. It was a characteristic of Chicago then, and one not generally shared by other cities, that individual firms of any pretension occupied the individual buildings. The presence of ample ground made this possible. It gave an imposing appearance to most of the wholesale houses, whose offices were upon the ground floor and in plain view of the street. The large plates of window glass, now so common, were then rapidly coming into use and gave the ground floor offices a distinguished and prosperous look. The casual wanderer could see as he passed a polished array of office fixtures, much frosted glass, clerks hard at work, and genteel businessmen in nobby suits and clean linen lounging about or sitting in groups. Polished brass or nickel signs at the square stone entrances announced the firm and the nature of the business in rather neat and reserved terms. The entire metropolitan center possessed a high and mighty air, calculated to overawe and abash the common applicant, and to make the gulf between poverty and success seem both wide and deep. Into this important commercial region the timid Carrie went. She walked east along Van Buren Street through a region of lessening importance until it deteriorated into a mass of shanties and coal yards, and finally verged upon the river. She walked bravely forward, led by an honest desire to find employment, and delayed at every step by the interest of the unfolding scene, and a sense of helplessness amid so much evidence of power and force which she did not understand. These vast buildings, what were they? These strange energies and huge interests, for what purposes were they there? She could have understood the meaning of a little stonecutter's yard at Columbia City, carving little pieces of marble for individual use. But when the yards of some huge stone corporation came into view, filled with spur tracks and flat cars, transpierced by docks from the river, and traversed overhead by immense trundling cranes of wood and steel, it lost all significance in her little world. It was so with the vast railroad yards, with the crowded array of vessels she saw at the river, and the huge factories over the way, lining the water's edge. Through the open windows she could see the figures of men and women in working aprons, moving busily about. The great streets were wall-lined mysteries to her, the vast offices, strange mazes, which concerned far-off individuals of importance. She could only think of people connected with them as counting money, dressing magnificently, and riding in carriages. What they dealt in, how they labored, to what end it all came, she had only the vaguest conception. It was all wonderful, all vast, all far removed, and she sank in spirit inwardly and fluttered feebly at the heart as she thought of entering any one of these mighty concerns and asking for something to do, something that she could do, anything. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Carrie Bradfield, St. Louis, Missouri. Chapter 3 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carrie Bradfield. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 3. We Question of Fortune, $4.50 a week. Once across the river and into the wholesale district, she glanced about her for some likely door at which to apply. As she contemplated the wide windows and imposing signs, she became conscious of being gazed upon and understood for what she was, a wage-seeker. She had never done this thing before and lacked courage. To avoid a certain indefinable shame she felt at being caught spying about for a position, she quickened her steps and assumed an air of indifference supposedly common to one upon an errand. In this way she passed many manufacturing and wholesale houses without once glancing in. At last, after several blocks of walking, she felt that this would not do, and began to look about again, though without relaxing her pace. A little way on she saw a great door which, for some reason, attracted her attention. It was ornamented by a small brass sign, and seemed to be the entrance to a vast hive of 6 or 7 floors. Perhaps, she thought, they may want someone, and crossed over to enter. When she came within a score of feet of the desired goal, she saw through the window a young man in a gray checked suit. That he had anything to do with the concern she could not tell, but because he happened to be looking in her direction, her weakening heart misgave her, and she hurried by, too overcome with shame to enter. Over the way stood a great 6-story structure, labeled Storm and King, which she viewed with rising hope. It was a wholesale dry goods concern and employed women. She could see them moving about now and then upon the upper floors. This place she decided to enter no matter what. She crossed over and walked directly toward the entrance. As she did so, 2 men came out and paused in the door. A telegraph messenger in blue dashed past her and up the few steps that led to the entrance and disappeared. Several pedestrians out of the hurrying throng which filled the sidewalks passed about her as she paused, hesitating. She looked helplessly around, and then, seeing herself observed, retreated. It was too difficult a task. She could not go past them. So severe a defeat told sadly upon her nerves. Her feet carried her mechanically forward, every foot of her progress being a satisfactory portion of a flight which she gladly made. Block after block passed by. Upon street lamps at the various corners she read names such as Madison, Monroe, LaSalle, Clark, Dearborn, State, and she still went, her feet beginning to tire upon the broad stone flagging. She was pleased, in part, that the streets were bright and clean. The morning sun, shining down with steadily increasing warmth, made the shady side of the streets pleasantly cool. She looked at the blue sky overhead with more realization of its charm than had ever come to her before. Her cowardice began to trouble her in a way. She turned back, resolving to bunt up Storm and King and enter. On the way she encountered a great wholesale shoe company, through the broad plate windows of which she saw an enclosed executive department, hidden by frosted glass. Without this enclosure, but just within the street entrance, sat a gray-haired gentleman at a small table, with a large open ledger before him. She walked by this institution several times, hesitating, but finding herself unobserved, faltered past the screen door and stood humbly waiting. "Well, young lady," observed the old gentleman, looking at her somewhat kindly, "what is it you wish?" "That is, do you need any help?" she stammered. "Not just at present," he answered, smiling. "Not just at present. Come in sometime next week. Occasionally we need someone." She received the answer in silence and backed awkwardly out. The pleasant nature of her reception rather astonished her. She had expected that it would be more difficult, that something cold and harsh would be said, she knew not what. That she had not been put to shame and made to feel her unfortunate position seemed remarkable. Somewhat encouraged, she ventured into another large structure. It was a clothing company, and more people were in evidence, well-dressed men of 40 and more, surrounded by brass railings. An office boy approached her. "Who is it you wish to see?" he asked. "I want to see the manager," she said. He ran away and spoke to one of a group of 3 men who were conferring together. One of these came towards her. "Well?" he said coldly. The greeting drove all courage from her at once. "Do you need any help?" she stammered. "No," he replied abruptly, and turned upon his heel. She went foolishly out, the office boy deferentially swinging the door for her, and gladly sank into the obscuring crowd. It was a severe setback to her recently pleased mental state. Now she walked quite aimlessly for a time, turning here and there, seeing one great company after another, but finding no courage to prosecute her single inquiry. High noon came, and with it hunger. She hunted out an unassuming restaurant and entered, but was disturbed to find that the prices were exorbitant for the size of her purse. A bowl of soup was all that she could afford, and, with this quickly eaten, she went out again. It restored her strength somewhat, and made her moderately bold to pursue the search. In walking a few blocks to fix upon some probable place, she again encountered the firm of Storm & King, and this time managed to get in. Some gentlemen were conferring close at hand, but took no notice of her. She was left standing, gazing nervously upon the floor. When the limit of her distress had been nearly reached, she was beckoned to by a man at one of the many desks within the nearby railing. "Who is it you wish to see?" he inquired. "Why, anyone, if you please," she answered. "I am looking for something to do." "Oh, you want to see Mr. McManus," he returned. "Sit down." And he pointed to a chair against the neighboring wall. He went on leisurely writing until, after a time, a short, stout gentleman came in from the street. "Mr. McManus," called the man at the desk, "this young woman wants to see you." The short gentleman turned about towards Carrie, and she arose and came forward. "What can I do for you, miss?" he inquired, surveying her curiously. "I want to know if I can get a position," she inquired. "As what?" he asked. "Not as anything in particular," she faltered. "Have you ever had any experience in the wholesale dry goods business?" he questioned. "No, sir," she replied. "Are you a stenographer or typewriter?" "No, sir." "Well, we haven't anything here," he said. "We employ only experienced help." She began to step backward toward the door, when something about her plaintive face attracted him. "Have you ever worked at anything before?" he inquired. "No, sir," she said. "Well, now, it's hardly possible that you would get anything to do in a wholesale house of this kind. Have you tried the department stores?" She acknowledged that she had not. "Well, if I were you," he said, looking at her rather genially, "I would try the department stores. They often need young women as clerks." "Thank you," she said, her whole nature relieved by this spark of friendly interest. "Yes," he said as she moved toward the door, "you try the department stores," and off he went. At that time the department store was in its earliest form of successful operation, and there were not many. The first 3 in the United States, established about 1884, were in Chicago. Carrie was familiar with the names of several through the advertisements in the Daily News, and now proceeded to seek them. The words of Mr. McManus had somehow managed to restore her courage, which had fallen low, and she dared to hope that this new line would offer her something. Some time she spent in wandering up and down, thinking to encounter the buildings by chance. So readily is the mind bent upon prosecuting a hard but needful errand, eased by that self-deception which the semblance of search, without the reality, gives. At last she inquired of a police officer, and was directed to proceed 2 blocks up, where she would find the fair. The nature of these vast retail combinations, should they ever permanently disappear, will form an interesting chapter in the commercial history of our nation. Such a flowering out of a modest trade principle the world had never witnessed up to that time. They were along the line of the most effective retail organization, with hundreds of stores coordinated into one and laid out upon the most imposing and economic basis. They were handsome, bustling, successful affairs, with a host of clerks and a swarm of patrons. Carrie passed along the busy aisles, much affected by the remarkable displays of trinkets, dress goods, stationery, and jewelry. Each separate counter was a showplace of dazzling interest and attraction. She could not help feeling the claim of each trinket and valuable upon her personally, and yet she did not stop. There was nothing there which she could not have used, nothing which she did not long to own. The dainty slippers and stockings, the delicately frilled skirts and petticoats, the laces, ribbons, hair combs, purses, all touched her with individual desire, and she felt keenly the fact that not any of these things were in the range of her purchase. She was a work-seeker, an outcast without employment, one whom the average employee could tell at a glance was poor and in need of a situation. It must not be thought that anyone could have mistaken her for a nervous, sensitive, high-strung nature, cast unduly upon a cold, calculating, and unpoetic world. Such certainly she was not, but women are peculiarly sensitive to their adornment. Not only did Carrie feel the drag of desire for all which was new and pleasing in apparel for women, but she noticed, too, with a touch at the heart, the fine ladies who elbowed and ignored her, brushing past in utter disregard of her presence, themselves eagerly enlisted in the materials which the store contained. Carrie was not familiar with the appearance of her more fortunate sisters of the city. Neither had she before known the nature and appearance of the shop girls with whom she now compared poorly. They were pretty in the main, some even handsome, with an air of independence and indifference, which added, in the case of the more favored, a certain piquancy. Their clothes were neat, in many instances fine, and wherever she encountered the eye of one, it was only to recognize in it a keen analysis of her own position, her individual shortcomings of dress, and that shadow of manner which she thought must hang about her and make clear to all who and what she was. A flame of envy lighted in her heart. She realized in a dim way how much the city held, wealth, fashion, ease, every adornment for women, and she longed for dress and beauty with a whole heart. On the second floor were the managerial offices, to which, after some inquiry, she was now directed. There she found other girls ahead of her, applicants like herself, but with more of that self-satisfied and independent air which experience of the city lends. Girls who scrutinized her in a painful manner. After a wait of perhaps 3/4 of an hour, she was called in turn. "Now," said a sharp, quick-mannered Jew, who was sitting at a roll-top desk near the window, "have you worked in any other store?" "No, sir," said Carrie. "Oh, you haven't?" he said, eyeing her keenly. "No, sir," she replied. "Well, we prefer young women just now with some experience. I guess we can't use you." Carrie stood waiting a moment, hardly certain whether the interview had terminated. "Don't wait," he exclaimed. "Remember, we are very busy here." Carrie began to move quickly to the door. "Hold on," he said, calling her back. "Give me your name and address. We want girls occasionally." When she had gotten safely into the street, she could scarcely restrain the tears. It was not so much the particular rebuff which she had just experienced, but the whole abashing trend of the day. She was tired and nervous. She abandoned the thought of appealing to the other department stores, and now wandered on, feeling a certain safety and relief in mingling with the crowd. In her indifferent wandering, she turned into Jackson Street, not far from the river, and was keeping her way along the south side of that imposing thoroughfare, when a piece of wrapping paper, written on with marking ink, and tacked up on the door, attracted her attention. It read, "Girls Wanted, Wrappers and Stitchers." She hesitated a moment, then entered. The firm of Spiegelheim and Company, makers of boys' caps, occupied one floor of the building. 50 feet in width and some 80 feet in depth, it was a place rather dingily lighted, the darkest portions having incandescent lights, filled with machines and work-benches. At the latter labored quite a company of girls and some men. The former were drabby-looking creatures, stained in face with oil and dust, clad in thin, shapeless cotton dresses and shod with more or less worn shoes. Many of them had their sleeves rolled up, revealing bare arms, and in some cases, owing to the heat, their dresses were open at the neck. They were a fair type of nearly the lowest order of shop girls, careless, slouchy, and more or less pale from confinement. They were not timid, however, were rich in curiosity, and strong in daring and slang. Carrie looked about her, very much disturbed and quite sure that she did not want to work here. Aside from making her uncomfortable by sidelong glances, no one paid her the least attention. She waited until the whole department was aware of her presence. Then some word was sent around, and a foreman, in an apron and shirt-sleeves, the latter rolled up to his shoulders, approached. "Do you want to see me?" he asked. "Do you need any help?" said Carrie, already learning directness of address. "Do you know how to stitch caps?" he returned. "No, sir," she replied. "Have you ever had any experience at this kind of work?" he inquired. She answered that she had not. "Well," said the foreman, scratching his ear meditatively, "we do need a stitcher. We like experienced help, though. We've hardly got time to break people in." He paused and looked away out of the window. "We might, though, put you at finishing," he concluded reflectively. "How much do you pay a week?" ventured Carrie, emboldened by a certain softness in the man's manner and his simplicity of address. 3.50, he answered. "Oh," she was about to exclaim, but checked herself and allowed her thoughts to die without expression. "We're not exactly in need of anybody," he went on vaguely, looking her over as one would a package. "You can come on Monday morning, though," he added, "and I'll put you to work." "Thank you," said Carrie weakly. "If you come, bring an apron," he added. He walked away and left her standing by the elevator, never so much as inquiring her name. While the appearance of the shop and the announcement of the price paid per week operated very much as a blow to Carrie's fancy, the fact that work of any kind was offered after so rude a round of experience was gratifying. She could not begin to believe that she would take the place, modest as her aspirations were. She had been used to better than that. Her mere experience in the free out-of-door life of the country caused her nature to revolt at such confinement. Dirt had never been her share. Her sister's flat was clean. This place was grimy and low. The girls were careless and hardened. They must be bad-minded and hearted, she imagined. Still, a place had been offered her. Surely Chicago was not so bad if she could find one place in one day. She might find another and better later. Her subsequent experiences were not of a reassuring nature, however. From all the more pleasing or imposing places she was turned away, abruptly, with the most chilling formality. In others where she applied only the experienced were required. She met with painful rebuffs, the most trying of which had been in a manufacturing cloak house, where she had gone to the 4th floor to inquire. "No, no," said the foreman, a rough, heavily built individual who looked after a miserably lighted workshop. "We don't want anyone. Don't come here." With the wane of the afternoon went her hopes, her courage, and her strength. She had been astonishingly persistent. So earnest an effort was well deserving of a better reward. On every hand, to her fatigued senses, the great business portion grew larger, harder, more stolid in its indifference. It seemed as if it was all closed to her, that the struggle was too fierce for her to hope to do anything at all. Men and women hurried by in long, shifting lines. She felt the flow of the tide of effort and interest, felt her own helplessness without quite realizing the wisp on the tide that she was. She cast about vainly for some possible place to apply, but found no door which she had the courage to enter. It would be the same thing all over, the old humiliation of her plea, rewarded by curt denial. Sick at heart and in body, she turned to the west, the direction of Minnie's flat, which she had now fixed in mind, and began that wearisome, baffled retreat which the seeker for employment at nightfall too often makes. In passing through Fifth Avenue south towards Van Buren Street, where she intended to take a car, she passed the door of a large wholesale shoe house, through the plate-glass window of which she could see a middle-aged gentleman sitting at a small desk. One of those forlorn impulses which often grow out of a fixed sense of defeat, the last sprouting of a baffled and uprooted growth of ideas, seized upon her. She walked deliberately through the door and up to the gentleman, who looked at her weary face with partially awakened interest. "What is it?" he said. "Can you give me something to do?" said Carrie. "Now, I really don't know," he said kindly. "What kind of work is it you want? You're not a typewriter, are you?" "Oh, no," answered Carrie. "Well, we only employ bookkeepers and typewriters here. You might go around to the side and inquire upstairs. They did want some help upstairs a few days ago. Ask for Mr. Brown." She hastened around to the side entrance and was taken up by the elevator to the 4th floor. "Call Mr. Brown, Willie," said the elevator man to a boy nearby. Willie went off and presently returned with the information that Mr. Brown said she should sit down and that he would be around in a little while. It was a portion of the stockroom which gave no idea of the general character of the place, and Carrie could form no opinion of the nature of the work. "So you want something to do," said Mr. Brown, after he inquired concerning the nature of her errand. "Have you ever been employed in a shoe factory before?" "No, sir," said Carrie. "What is your name?" he inquired, and being informed, "Well, I don't know as I have anything for you. Would you work for 4.5 a week?" Carrie was too worn by defeat not to feel that it was considerable. She had not expected that he would offer her less than 6. She acquiesced, however, and he took her name and address. "Well," he said finally, "you report here at 8 o'clock Monday morning. I think I can find something for you to do." He left her, revived by the possibilities, sure that she had found something at last. Instantly the blood crept warmly over her body. Her nervous tension relaxed. She walked out into the busy street and discovered a new atmosphere. Behold, the throng was moving with a lightsome step. She noticed that men and women were smiling. Scraps of conversation and notes of laughter floated to her. The air was light. People were already pouring out of the buildings, their labor ended for the day. She noticed that they were pleased, and thoughts of her sister's home and the meal that would be awaiting her quickened her steps. She hurried on, tired perhaps, but no longer weary of foot. What would not Minnie say? Ah, the long winter in Chicago, the lights, the crowd, the amusement. This was a great, pleasing metropolis after all. Her new firm was a goodly institution. Its windows were of huge plate glass. She could probably do well there. Thoughts of Drouet returned, of the things he had told her. She now felt that life was better, that it was livelier, sprightlier. She boarded a car in the best of spirits, feeling her blood still flowing pleasantly. She would live in Chicago, her mind kept saying to itself. She would have a better time than she had ever had before. She would be happy. End of Chapter 3. Recording by Carrie Bradfield, St. Louis, Missouri.
Chapter 4 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sheila Morton. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 4. The Spendings of Fancy. Facts answer with sneers. For the next 2 days, Carrie indulged in the most high-flown speculations. Her fancy plunged recklessly into privileges and amusements which would have been much more becoming had she been cradled a child of fortune. With ready will and quick mental selection she scattered her meagre $4.50 per week with a swift and graceful hand. Indeed, as she sat in her rocking-chair these several evenings before going to bed and looked out upon the pleasantly lighted street, this money cleared for its prospective possessor the way to every joy and every bauble which the heart of woman may desire. "I will have a fine time," she thought. Her sister Minnie knew nothing of these rather wild cerebrations, though they exhausted the markets of delight. She was too busy scrubbing the kitchen woodwork and calculating the purchasing power of 80 cents for Sunday's dinner. When Carrie had returned home, flushed with her first success and ready, for all her weariness, to discuss the now interesting events which led up to her achievement, the former had merely smiled approvingly and inquired whether she would have to spend any of it for car fare. This consideration had not entered in before, and it did not now for long affect the glow of Carrie's enthusiasm. Disposed as she then was to calculate upon that vague basis which allows the subtraction of one sum from another without any perceptible diminution, she was happy. When Hanson came home at 7 o'clock, he was inclined to be a little crusty, his usual demeanor before supper. This never showed so much in anything he said as in a certain solemnity of countenance and the silent manner in which he slopped about. He had a pair of yellow carpet slippers which he enjoyed wearing, and these he would immediately substitute for his solid pair of shoes. This, and washing his face with the aid of common washing soap until it glowed a shiny red, constituted his only preparation for his evening meal. He would then get his evening paper and read in silence. For a young man, this was rather a morbid turn of character, and so affected Carrie. Indeed, it affected the entire atmosphere of the flat, as such things are inclined to do, and gave to his wife's mind its subdued and tactful turn, anxious to avoid taciturn replies. Under the influence of Carrie's announcement he brightened up somewhat. "You didn't lose any time, did you?" he remarked, smiling a little. "No," returned Carrie with a touch of pride. He asked her 1 or 2 more questions and then turned to play with the baby, leaving the subject until it was brought up again by Minnie at the table. Carrie, however, was not to be reduced to the common level of observation which prevailed in the flat. "It seems to be such a large company," she said at one place. "Great big plate-glass windows and lots of clerks. The man I saw said they hired ever so many people." "It's not very hard to get work now," put in Hanson, "if you look right." Minnie, under the warming influence of Carrie's good spirits and her husband's somewhat conversational mood, began to tell Carrie of some of the well-known things to see, things the enjoyment of which cost nothing. "You'd like to see Michigan Avenue. There are such fine houses. It is such a fine street." "Where is H.R. Jacobs?" interrupted Carrie, mentioning one of the theaters devoted to melodrama, which went by that name at the time. "Oh, it's not very far from here," answered Minnie. "It's in Halsted Street, right up here." "How I'd like to go there! I crossed Halsted Street today, didn't I?" At this there was a slight halt in the natural reply. Thoughts are a strangely permeating factor. At her suggestion of going to the theatre, the unspoken shade of disapproval to the doings of those things which involved the expenditure of money, shades of feeling which arose in the mind of Hanson and then in Minnie, slightly affected the atmosphere of the table. Minnie answered yes, but Carrie could feel that going to the theatre was poorly advocated here. The subject was put off for a little while until Hanson, through with his meal, took his paper and went into the front room. When they were alone, the two sisters began a somewhat freer conversation, Carrie interrupting it to hum a little as they worked at the dishes. "I should like to walk up and see Halsted Street if it isn't too far," said Carrie after a time. "Why don't we go to the theatre tonight?" "Oh, I don't think Sven would want to go tonight," returned Minnie. "He has to get up so early." "He wouldn't mind. He'd enjoy it," said Carrie. "No, he doesn't go very often," returned Minnie. "Well, I'd like to go," rejoined Carrie. "Let's you and me go." Minnie pondered a while, not upon whether she could or would go, for that point was already negatively settled with her, but upon some means of diverting the thoughts of her sister to some other topic. "We'll go some other time," she said at last, finding no ready means of escape. Carrie sensed the root of the opposition at once. "I have some money," she said. "You go with me." Minnie shook her head. "He could go along," said Carrie. "No," returned Minnie softly, and rattling the dishes to drown the conversation. "He wouldn't." It had been several years since Minnie had seen Carrie, and in that time the latter's character had developed a few shades. Naturally timid in all things that related to her own advancement, and especially so when without power or resource, her craving for pleasure was so strong that it was the one stay of her nature. She would speak for that when silent on all else. "Ask him," she pleaded softly. Minnie was thinking of the resource which Carrie's board would add. It would pay the rent and would make the subject of expenditure a little less difficult to talk about with her husband. But if Carrie was going to think of running around in the beginning, there would be a hitch somewhere. Unless Carrie submitted to a solemn round of industry and saw the need of hard work without longing for play, how was her coming to the city to profit them? These thoughts were not those of a cold, hard nature at all. They were the serious reflections of a mind which invariably adjusted itself, without much complaining, to such surroundings as its industry could make for it. At last she yielded enough to ask Hanson. It was a half-hearted procedure, without a shade of desire on her part. "Carrie wants us to go to the theatre," she said, looking in upon her husband. Hanson looked up from his paper, and they exchanged a mild look which said as plainly as anything, "This isn't what we expected." "I don't care to go," he returned. "What does she want to see?" "H.R. Jacobs," said Minnie. He looked down at his paper and shook his head negatively. When Carrie saw how they looked upon her proposition, she gained a still clearer feeling of their way of life. It weighed on her, but took no definite form of opposition. "I think I'll go down and stand at the foot of the stairs," she said after a time. Minnie made no objection to this, and Carrie put on her hat and went below. "Where has Carrie gone?" asked Hanson, coming back into the dining room when he heard the door close. "She said she was going down to the foot of the stairs," answered Minnie. "I guess she just wants to look out a while." "She oughtn't to be thinking about spending her money on theaters already, do you think?" he said. "She just feels a little curious, I guess," ventured Minnie. "Everything is so new." "I don't know," said Hanson, and went over to the baby, his forehead slightly wrinkled. He was thinking of a full career of vanity and wastefulness which a young girl might indulge in, and wondering how Carrie could contemplate such a course when she had so little, as yet, with which to do. On Saturday, Carrie went out by herself, first toward the river, which interested her, and then back along Jackson Street, which was then lined by the pretty houses and fine lawns, which subsequently caused it to be made into a boulevard. She was struck with the evidences of wealth, although there was, perhaps, not a person on the street worth more than $100,000. She was glad to be out of the flat, because already she felt that it was a narrow, humdrum place, and that interest and joy lay elsewhere. Her thoughts now were of a more liberal character, and she punctuated them with speculations as to the whereabouts of Drouet. She was not sure but that he might call anyhow Monday night, and while she felt a little disturbed at the possibility, there was, nevertheless, just the shade of a wish that he would. On Monday she rose early and prepared to go to work. She dressed herself in a worn shirt-waist of dotted blue percale, a skirt of light brown serge, rather faded, and a small straw hat which she had worn all summer at Columbia City. Her shoes were old, and her necktie was in that crumpled, flattened state which time and much wearing impart. She made a very average-looking shop-girl, with the exception of her features. These were slightly more even than common, and gave her a sweet, reserved, and pleasing appearance. It is no easy thing to get up early in the morning when one is used to sleeping until 7 and 8, as Carrie had been at home. She gained some inkling of the character of Hanson's life when, half asleep, she looked out into the dining-room at 6 o'clock and saw him silently finishing his breakfast. By the time she was dressed he was gone, and she, Minnie, and the baby ate together, the latter being just old enough to sit in a high chair and disturb the dishes with a spoon. Her spirits were greatly subdued now when the fact of entering upon strange and untried duties confronted her. Only the ashes of all her fine fancies were remaining, ashes still concealing, nevertheless, a few red embers of hope. So subdued was she by her weakening nerves that she ate quite in silence, going over imaginary conceptions of the character of the shoe company, the nature of the work, her employer's attitude. She was vaguely feeling that she would come in contact with the great owners, that her work would be where grave, stylishly dressed men occasionally look on. "Well, good luck," said Minnie when she was ready to go. They had agreed it was best to walk, that morning at least, to see if she could do it every day, 60 cents a week for car fare being quite an item under the circumstances. "I'll tell you how it goes tonight," said Carrie. Once in the sunlit street, with laborers tramping by in either direction, the horse-cars passing crowded to the rails with the small clerks and floor help in the great wholesale houses, and men and women generally coming out of doors and passing about the neighborhood, Carrie felt slightly reassured. In the sunshine of the morning, beneath the wide, blue heavens, with a fresh wind astir, what fears except the most desperate can find a harbourage? In the night or the gloomy chambers of the day, fears and misgivings wax strong, but out in the sunlight there is, for a time, cessation even of the terror of death. Carrie went straight forward until she crossed the river and then turned into Fifth Avenue. The thoroughfare in this part was like a walled cannon of brown stone and dark red brick. The big windows looked shiny and clean. Trucks were rumbling in an increasing number. Men and women, girls and boys were moving onward in all directions. She met girls of her own age, who looked at her as if with contempt for her diffidence. She wondered at the magnitude of this life, and at the importance of knowing much in order to do anything in it at all. Dread at her own inefficiency crept upon her. She would not know how, she would not be quick enough. Had not all the other places refused her because she did not know something or other? She would be scolded, abused, ignominiously discharged. It was with weak knees and a slight catch in her breathing that she came up to the great shoe company at Adams and Fifth Avenue and entered the elevator. When she stepped out on the 4th floor, there was no one at hand, only great aisles of boxes piled to the ceiling. She stood, very much frightened, awaiting someone. Presently Mr. Brown came up. He did not seem to recognize her. "What is it you want?" he inquired. Carrie's heart sank. "You said I should come this morning to see about work." "Oh," he interrupted, yes. What is your name?" "Carrie Meeber." "Yes," said he. "You come with me." He led the way through dark, box-lined aisles which had the smell of new shoes, until they came to an iron door which opened into the factory proper. There was a large, low-ceiled room with clacking, rattling machines at which men in white shirt-sleeves and blue gingham aprons were working. She followed him diffidently through the clattering automatons, keeping her eyes straight before her and flushing slightly. They crossed to a far corner and took an elevator to the 6th floor. Out of the array of machines and benches Mr. Brown signaled a foreman. "This is the girl," he said, and turning to Carrie, "You go with him." He then returned, and Carrie followed her new superior to a little desk in a corner, which he used as a kind of official centre. "You've never worked at anything like this before, have you?" he questioned rather sternly. "No, sir," she answered. He seemed rather annoyed at having to bother with such help, but put down her name and then led her across to where a line of girls occupied stools in front of clacking machines. On the shoulder of one of the girls, who was punching eye holes in one piece of the upper by the aid of the machine, he put his hand. "You," he said, "show this girl how to do what you're doing. When you get through, come to me." The girl so addressed rose promptly and gave Carrie her place. "It isn't hard to do," she said, bending over. "You just take this so, fasten it with this clamp, and start the machine." She suited action to word, fastened the piece of leather which was eventually to form the right half of the upper of a man's shoe by little adjustable clamps, and pushed a small steel rod at the side of the machine. The latter jumped to the task of punching, with sharp, snapping clicks, cutting circular bits of leather out of the side of the upper, leaving the holes which were to hold the laces. After observing a few times, the girl let her work at it alone. Seeing that it was fairly well done, she went away. The pieces of leather came from the girl at the machine to her right, and were passed on to the girl at her left. Carrie saw at once that an average speed was necessary, or the work would pile up on her, and all those below would be delayed. She had no time to look about, and bent anxiously to her task. The girls at her left and right realized her predicament and feelings, and in a way tried to aid her as much as they dared by working slower. At this task she labored incessantly for some time, finding relief from her own nervous fears and imaginings in the humdrum mechanical movement of the machine. She felt, as the minutes passed, that the room was not very light. It had a thick odor of fresh leather, but that did not worry her. She felt the eyes of the other help upon her, and troubled lest she was not working fast enough. Once, when she was fumbling at the little clamp, having made a slight error in setting in the leather, a great hand appeared before her eyes and fastened the clamp for her. It was the foreman. Her heart thumped so that she could scarcely see to go on. "Start your machine," he said. "Start your machine. Don't keep the line waiting." This recovered her sufficiently, and she went excitedly on, hardly breathing until the shadow moved away from behind her. Then she heaved a great breath. As the morning wore on, the room became hotter. She felt the need of a breath of fresh air and a drink of water, but did not venture to stir. The stool she sat on was without a back or footrest, and she began to feel uncomfortable. She found, after a time, that her back was beginning to ache. She twisted and turned from one position to another, slightly different, but it did not case her for long. She was beginning to weary. "Stand up, why don't you?" said the girl at her right, without any form of introduction. "They won't care." Carrie looked at her gratefully. "I guess I will," she said. She stood up from her stool and worked that way for a while, but it was a more difficult position. Her neck and shoulders ached in bending over. The spirit of the place impressed itself on her in a rough way. She did not venture to look around, but above the clack of the machine she could hear an occasional remark. She could also note a thing or two out of the side of her eye. "Did you see Harry last night?" said the girl at her left, addressing her neighbor. "No." "You ought to have seen the tie he had on. Gee, but he was a mark." "Tst," said the other girl, bending over her work. The first, silenced, instantly assumed a solemn face. The foreman passed slowly along, eyeing each worker distinctly. The moment he was gone, the conversation was resumed again. "Say," began the girl at her left, "what'd you think he said?" "I don't know." "He said he saw us with Eddie Harris at Martin's last night." "No." They both giggled. A youth with tan-colored hair that needed clipping very badly came shuffling along between the machines, bearing a basket of leather findings under his left arm and pressed against his stomach. When near Carrie he stretched out his right hand and gripped one girl under the arm. Let me go," she exclaimed angrily. "Duffer." He only grinned broadly in return. "Rubber," he called back as she looked after him. There was nothing of the gallant in him. Carrie at last could scarcely sit still. Her legs began to tire, and she wanted to get up and stretch. Would noon never come? It seemed as if she had worked an entire day. She was not hungry at all, but weak, and her eyes were tired, straining at the one point where the eye punch came down. The girl at the right noticed her squirmings and felt sorry for her. She was concentrating herself too thoroughly. What she did really required less mental and physical strain. There was nothing to be done, however. The halves of the uppers came piling steadily down. Her hands began to ache at the wrists and then in the fingers, and towards the last she seemed one mass of dull, complaining muscles, fixed in an eternal position and performing a single mechanical movement which became more and more distasteful, until at last it was absolutely nauseating. When she was wondering whether the strain would ever cease, a dull-sounding bell clanged somewhere down an elevator shaft, and the end came. In an instant there was a buzz of action and conversation. All the girls instantly left their stools and hurried away in an adjoining room. Men passed through, coming from some department which opened on the right. The whirling wheels began to sing in a steadily modifying key, until at last they died away in a low buzz. There was an audible stillness in which the common voice sounded strange. Carrie got up and sought her lunch-box. She was stiff, a little dizzy, and very thirsty. On the way to the small space portioned off by wood, where all the wraps and lunches were kept, she encountered the foreman, who stared at her hard. "Well," he said, "did you get along all right?" "I think so," she replied very respectfully. "Huh," he replied for want of something better, and walked on. Under better material conditions this kind of work would not have been so bad, but the new socialism, which involves pleasant working conditions for employees, had not then taken hold upon manufacturing companies. The place smelled of the oil of the machines and the new leather, a combination which, added to the stale odors of the building, was not pleasant even in cold weather. The floor, though regularly swept every evening, presented a littered surface. Not the slightest provision had been made for the comfort of the employees, the idea being that something was gained by giving them as little and making the work as hard and unremunerative as possible. What we know of footrests, swivel-back chairs, dining rooms for the girls, clean aprons and curling irons supplied free, and a decent cloakroom, were unthought of. The washrooms were disagreeable, crude if not foul places, and the whole atmosphere was sordid. Carrie looked about her after she had drunk a tinful of water from a bucket in one corner, for a place to sit and eat. The other girls had ranged themselves about the windows of the work-benches of those of the men who had gone out. She saw no place which did not hold a couple or a group of girls, and being too timid to think of intruding herself, she sought out her machine, and, seated upon her stool, opened her lunch on her lap. There she sat listening to the chatter and comment about her. It was, for the most part, silly, and graced by the current slang. Several of the men in the room exchanged compliments with the girls at long range. "Say, Kitty," called one to a girl who was doing a waltz step in a few feet of space near one of the windows, "are you going to the ball with me?" "Look out, Kitty," called another, "you'll jar your back hair." "Go on, rubber," was her only comment. As Carrie listened to this and much more of similar familiar badinage among the men and girls, she instinctively withdrew into herself. She was not used to this type, and felt that there was something hard and low about it all. She feared that the young boys about would address such remarks to her, boys who, beside Drouet, seemed uncouth and ridiculous. She made the average feminine distinction between clothes, putting worth, goodness, and distinction in a dress suit, and leaving all the unlovely qualities in those beneath notice in overalls and jumper. She was glad when the short half-hour was over and the wheels began to whir again. Though wearied, she would be inconspicuous. This illusion ended when another young man passed along the aisle and poked her indifferently in the ribs with his thumb. She turned about, indignation leaping to her eyes, but he had gone on, and only once turned to grin. She found it difficult to conquer an inclination to cry. The girl next her noticed her state of mind. "Don't you mind," she said. "He's too fresh." Carrie said nothing, but bent over her work. She felt as though she could hardly endure such a life. Her idea of work had been so entirely different. All during the long afternoon she thought of the city outside and its imposing show, crowds, and fine buildings. Columbia City and the better side of her home life came back. By 3 o'clock she was sure it must be 6, and by 4 it seemed as if they had forgotten to note the hour, and were letting all work overtime. The foreman became a true ogre, prowling constantly about, keeping her tied down to her miserable task. What she heard of the conversation about her only made her feel sure she did not want to make friends with any of these. When 6 o'clock came, she hurried eagerly away, her arms aching and her limbs stiff from sitting in one position. As she passed out along the hall after getting her hat, a young machine hand, attracted by her looks, made bold to jest with her. "Say, Maggie," he called, "if you wait, I'll walk with you." It was thrown so straight in her direction that she knew who was meant, but never turned to look. In the crowded elevator, another dusty, toil-stained youth tried to make an impression on her by leering in her face. One young man, waiting on the walk outside for the appearance of another, grinned at her as she passed. "Ain't going my way, are you?" he called jocosely. Carrie turned her face to the west with a subdued heart. As she turned the corner she saw through the great shiny window the small desk at which she had applied. There were the crowds, hurrying with the same buzz and energy-yielding enthusiasm. She felt a slight relief, but it was only at her escape. She felt ashamed in the face of better-dressed girls who went by. She felt as though she should be better served, and her heart revolted. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sheila Morton. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 5. A Glittering Night Flower. The Use of a Name. Drouet did not call that evening. After receiving the letter, he had laid aside all thought of Carrie for the time being, and was floating around having what he considered a gay time. On this particular evening he dined at Rector's, a restaurant of some local fame, which occupied a basement of Clark and Monroe Streets. Thereafter he visited the resort of Fitzgerald and Moyes in Adams Street, opposite the imposing Federal Building. There he leaned over the splendid bar and swallowed a glass of plain whiskey and purchased a couple of cigars, one of which he lighted. This, to him, represented in part high life, a fair sample of what the whole must be. Drouet was not a drinker in excess. He was not a moneyed man. He only craved the best, as his mind conceived it, and such doings seemed to him a part of the best. Rector's, with its polished marble walls and floor, its profusion of lights, its show of china and silverware, and, above all, its reputation as a resort for actors and professional men, seemed to him the proper place for a successful man to go. He loved fine clothes, good eating, and particularly the company and acquaintanceship of successful men. When dining, it was a source of keen satisfaction to him to know that Joseph Jefferson was wont to come to this same place, or that Henry E. Dixie, a well-known performer of the day, was then only a few tables off. At Rector's he could always obtain this satisfaction, for there one could encounter politicians, brokers, actors, some rich young rounders of the town, all eating and drinking amid a buzz of popular commonplace conversation. "That's so-and-so over there," was a common remark of these gentlemen among themselves, particularly among those who had not yet reached, but hoped to do so, the dazzling height which money to dine here lavishly represented. "You don't say so," would be the reply. "Why, yes, didn't you know that? Why, he's manager of the Grand Opera House." When these things would fall upon Drouet's ears, he would straighten himself a little more stiffly and eat with solid comfort. If he had any vanity, this augmented it, and if he had any ambition, this stirred it. He would be able to flash a roll of greenbacks, too, some day. As it was, he could eat where they did. His preference for Fitzgerald and Moyes' Adams Street place was another yard off the same cloth. This was really a gorgeous salon from a Chicago standpoint. Like Rector's, it was also ornamented with a blaze of incandescent lights held in handsome chandeliers. The floors were of brightly colored tiles, the walls a composition of rich, dark, polished wood, which reflected the light, and colored stucco work, which gave the place a very sumptuous appearance. The long bar was a blaze of lights, polished woodwork, colored and cut glassware, and many fancy bottles. It was a truly swell salon, with rich screens, fancy wines, and a line of bar goods unsurpassed in the country. At Rector's, Drouet had met Mr. G. W. Hurstwood, manager of Fitzgerald and Moyes. He had been pointed out as a very successful and well-known man about town. Hurstwood looked the part, for besides being slightly under 40, he had a good, stout constitution, an active manner, and a solid, substantial air, which was composed in part of his fine clothes, his clean linen, his jewels, and above all, his own sense of his importance. Drouet immediately conceived a notion of him as being someone worth knowing, and was glad not only to meet him, but to visit the Adams Street bar thereafter whenever he wanted a drink or a cigar. Hurstwood was an interesting character after his kind. He was shrewd and clever in many little things, and capable of creating a good impression. His managerial position was fairly important, a kind of stewardship which was imposing but lacked financial control. He had risen by perseverance and industry through long years of service, from the position of a barkeeper in a commonplace saloon to his present altitude. He had a little office in the place, set off in polished cherry and grill work, where he kept in a roll-top desk the rather simple accounts of the place, supplies ordered and needed. The chief executive and financial functions devolved upon the owners, Messrs. Fitzgerald and Moy, and upon a cashier who looked after the money taken in. For the most part he lounged about, dressed in excellent tailored suits of imported goods, a solitaire ring, a fine blue diamond in his tie, a striking vest of some new pattern, and a watch-chain of solid gold, which held a charm of rich design, and a watch of the latest make and engraving. He knew by name and could greet personally with a "Well, old fellow," hundreds of actors, merchants, politicians, and the general run of successful characters about town, and it was part of his success to do so. He had a finely graduated scale of informality and friendship, which improved from the "How do you do?" addressed to the $15-a-week clerks and office attachés, who, by long frequenting of the place, became aware of his position, to the "Why, old man, how are you?" which he addressed to those noted or rich individuals who knew him and were inclined to be friendly. There was a class, however, too rich, too famous, or too successful, with whom he could not attempt any familiarity of address, and with these he was professionally tactful, assuming a grave and dignified attitude, paying them the deference which would win their good feeling without in the least compromising his own bearing and opinions. There were, in the last place, a few good followers, neither rich nor poor, famous nor yet remarkably successful, with whom he was friendly on the score of good fellowship. These were the kind of men with whom he would converse longest and most seriously. He loved to go out and have a good time once in a while, to go to the races, the theatres, the sporting entertainments at some of the clubs. He kept a horse and neat trap, had his wife and 2 children who were well established in a neat house on the north side near Lincoln Park, and was altogether a very acceptable individual of our great American upper class, the first grade below the luxuriously rich. Hurstwood liked Drouet. The latter's genial nature and dressy appearance pleased him. He knew that Drouet was only a travelling salesman, and not one of many years at that, but the firm of Bartlett, Carrie and Company was a large and prosperous house, and Drouet stood well. Hurstwood knew Carrie quite well, having drunk a glass now and then with him in company with several others, when the conversation was general. Drouet had what was a help in his business, a moderate sense of humour, and could tell a good story when the occasion required. He could talk races with Hurstwood, tell interesting incidents concerning himself and his experiences with women, and report the state of trade in the cities which he visited, and so managed to make himself almost invariably agreeable. Tonight he was particularly so, since his report to the company had been favourably commented upon, his new samples had been satisfactorily selected, and his trip marked out for the next 6 weeks. "Why, hello, Charlie, old man," said Hurstwood as Drouet came in that evening about 8 o'clock. "How goes it?" The room was crowded. Drouet shook hands, beaming good nature, and they strolled towards the bar. "Oh, all right." "I haven't seen you in 6 weeks. When did you get in?" "Friday," said Drouet. "Had a fine trip." "Glad of it," said Hurstwood, his black eyes lit with a warmth which half displaced the cold make-believe that usually dwelt in them. "What are you going to take?" he added, as the barkeeper, in snowy jacket and tie, leaned toward them from behind the bar. "Old Pepper," said Drouet. "A little of the same for me," put in Hurstwood. "How long are you in town this time?" inquired Hurstwood. "Only until Wednesday. I'm going up to St. Paul." "George Evans was in here Saturday and said he saw you in Milwaukee last week." "Yes, I saw George," returned Drouet. "Great old boy, isn't he? We had quite a time there together." The barkeeper was setting out the glasses and bottle before them, and they now poured out the draught as they talked, Drouet filling his to within a third of full, as was considered proper, and Hurstwood taking the barest suggestion of whiskey and modifying it with seltzer. "What's become of Carrie?" remarked Hurstwood. "I haven't seen him around here in 2 weeks." "Laid up, they say," exclaimed Drouet. "Say, he's a gouty old boy." "Made a lot of money in his time, though, hasn't he?" "Yes, wads of it," returned Drouet. "He won't live much longer. Barely comes down to the office now." "Just one boy, hasn't he?" asked Hurstwood. "Yes, and a swift pacer," laughed Drouet. "I guess he can't hurt the business very much, though, with the other members all there." "No, he can't injure that any, I guess." Hurstwood was standing, his coat open, his thumbs in his pocket, the light on his jewels and rings relieving them with agreeable distinctness. He was the picture of fastidious comfort. To one not inclined to drink, and gifted with a more serious turn of mind, such a bubbling, chattering, glittering chamber must ever seem an anomaly, a strange commentary on nature and life. Here come the moths in endless procession to bask in the light of the flame. Such conversation as one may hear would not warrant a commendation of the scene upon intellectual grounds. It seems plain that schemers would choose more sequestered quarters to arrange their plans, that politicians would not gather here in company to discuss anything save formalities where the sharp-eared may hear, and it would scarcely be justified on the score of thirst, or the majority of those who frequented these more gorgeous places have no craving for liquor. Nevertheless, the fact that here men gather, here chatter, here love to pass and rub elbows, must be explained upon some grounds. It must be that a strange bundle of passions and vague desires give rise to such a curious social institution, or it would not be. Drouet, for one, was lured as much by his longing for pleasure as by his desire to shine among his betters. The many friends he met here dropped in because they craved, without perhaps consciously analyzing it, the company, the glow, the atmosphere which they found. One might take it, after all, as an augur of the better social order, for the things which they satisfied here, though sensory, were not evil. No evil could come out of the contemplation of an expensively decorated chamber. The worst effect of such a thing would be, perhaps, to stir up in the material-minded an ambition to arrange their lives upon a similarly splendid basis. In the last analysis, that would scarcely be called the fault of the decorations, but rather of the innate trend of the mind. That such a scene might stir the less expensively dressed to emulate the more expensively dressed could scarcely be laid at the door of anything save the false ambition of the minds of those so affected. Remove the element so thoroughly and solely complained of, liquor, and there would not be one to gainsay the qualities of beauty and enthusiasm which would remain. The pleased eye with which our modern restaurants of fashion are looked upon is proof of this assertion. Yet here is the fact of the lighted chamber, the dressy, greedy company, the small, self-interested palaver, the disorganized, aimless, wandering mental action which it represents, the love of light and show and finery which, to one outside, under the serene light of the eternal stars, must seem a strange and shiny thing. Under the stars and sweeping night winds, what a lamp-flower it must bloom, a strange, glittering night-flower, odor-yielding, insect-drawing, insect-infested rose of pleasure. "See that fellow coming in there?" said Hurstwood, glancing at a gentleman just entering, arrayed in a high hat and Prince Albert coat, his fat cheeks puffed and red as with good eating. "No, where?" said Drouet. "There," said Hurstwood, indicating the direction by a cast of his eye, "the man with the silk hat." "Oh, yes," said Drouet, now affecting not to see. "Who is he?" "That's Jules Wallace, the spiritualist." Drouet followed him with his eyes, much interested. "Doesn't look much like a man who sees spirits, does he?" said Drouet. "Oh, I don't know," returned Hurstwood. "He's got the money all right, and a little twinkle passed over his eyes. "I don't go much on those things, do you?" asked Drouet. "Well, you never can tell," said Hurstwood. "There may be something to it. I wouldn't bother about it myself, though. By the way," he added, "are you going anywhere tonight?" "The Hole in the Ground," said Drouet, mentioning the popular farce of the time. "Well, you'd better be going. It's 8:30 already," and he drew out his watch. The crowd was already thinning out considerably, some bound for the theatres, some to their clubs, and some to that most fascinating of all the pleasures, for the type of man there represented, at least, the ladies. "Yes, I will," said Drouet. "Come around after the show. I have something I want to show you," said Hurstwood. "Sure," said Drouet, elated. "You haven't anything on hand for the night, have you?" added Hurstwood. "Not a thing." "Well, come round then." "I struck a little peach coming in on the train Friday," remarked Drouet by way of parting. "By George, that's so. I must go and call on her before I go away." "Oh, never mind her," Hurstwood remarked. "Say, she was a little dandy, I tell you," went on Drouet confidentially and trying to impress his friend. 12:00, said Hurstwood. "That's right," said Drouet, going out. Thus was Carrie's name bandied about in the most frivolous and gay of places, and that also when the little toiler was bemoaning her narrow lot, which was almost inseparable from the early stages of this, her unfolding fate. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sheila Morton. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 6, The Machine and the Maiden, A Night of Today. At the flat that evening, Carrie felt a new phase of its atmosphere. The fact that it was unchanged, while her feelings were different, increased her knowledge of its character. Minnie, after the good spirits Carrie manifested at first, expected a fair report. Hanson supposed that Carrie would be satisfied. "Well," he said as he came in from the hall in his working clothes and looked at Carrie through the dining-room door, "how did you make out?" "Oh," said Carrie, "it's pretty hard. I don't like it." There was an air about her which showed plainer than any words that she was both weary and disappointed. "What sort of work is it?" he asked, lingering a moment as he turned upon his heel to go into the bathroom. "Running a machine," answered Carrie. It was very evident that it did not concern him much, save from the side of the flat's success. He was irritated a shade because it could not have come about in the throe of fortune for Carrie to be pleased. Minnie worked with less elation than she had just before Carrie arrived. The sizzle of the meat frying did not sound quite so pleasing now that Carrie had reported her discontent. To Carrie, the one relief of the whole day would have been a jolly home, a sympathetic reception, a bright supper table, and someone to say, "Oh, well, stand it a little while. You will get something better." But now this was ashes. She began to see that they looked upon her complaint as unwarranted, and that she was supposed to work on and say nothing. She knew that she was to pay $4 for her board and room, and now she felt that it would be an exceedingly gloomy round living with these people. Minnie was no companion for her sister. She was too old. Her thoughts were staid and solemnly adapted to a condition. If Hanson had any pleasant thoughts or happy feelings, he concealed them. He seemed to do all his mental operations without the aid of physical expression. He was as still as a deserted chamber. Carrie, on the other hand, had the blood of youth and some imagination. Her day of love and the mysteries of courtship were still ahead. She could think of things she would like to do, of clothes she would like to wear, and of places she would like to visit. These were the things upon which her mind ran, and it was like meeting with opposition at every turn to find no one here to call forth or respond to her feelings. She had forgotten, in considering and explaining the result of her day, that Drouet might come. Now, when she saw how unreceptive these two people were, she hoped he would not. She did not know exactly what she would do or how she would explain to Drouet if he came. After supper she changed her clothes. When she was trimly dressed she was rather a sweet little being, with large eyes and a sad mouth. Her face expressed the mingled expectancy, dissatisfaction, and depression she felt. She wandered about after the dishes were put away, talked a little with Minnie, and then decided to go down and stand in the door at the foot of the stairs. If Drouet came, she could meet him there. Her face took on the semblance of a look of happiness as she put on her hat to go below. "Carrie doesn't seem to like her place very well," said Minnie to her husband when the latter came out, paper in hand, to sit in the dining-room a few minutes. "She ought to keep it for a time, anyhow," said Hanson. "Has she gone downstairs?" "Yes," said Minnie. "I'd tell her to keep it if I were you. She might be here weeks without getting another one." Minnie said she would, and Hanson read his paper. "If I were you," he said a little later, "I wouldn't let her stand in the door down there. It don't look good." "I'll tell her," said Minnie. The life of the streets continued for a long time to interest Carrie. She never wearied of wondering where the people in the cars were going or what their enjoyments were. Her imagination trod a very narrow round, always winding up at points which concerned money, looks, clothes, or enjoyment. She would have a far-off thought of Columbia City now and then, or an irritating rush of feeling concerning her experiences of the present day, but on the whole the little world about her enlisted her whole attention. The first floor of the building, of which Hanson's flat was the third, was occupied by a bakery, and to this, while she was standing there, Hanson came down to buy a loaf of bread. She was not aware of his presence until he was quite near her. "I'm after bread," was all he said as he passed. The contagion of thought here demonstrated itself. While Hanson really came for bread, the thought dwelt with him that now he would see what Carrie was doing. No sooner did he draw near her with that in mind than she felt it. Of course she had no understanding of what put it into her head, but nevertheless it aroused in her the first shade of real antipathy to him. She knew now that she did not like him. He was suspicious. A thought will color a world for us. The flow of Carrie's meditations had been disturbed, and Hanson had not long gone upstairs before she followed. She had realized with the lapse of the quarter hours that Drouet was not coming, and somehow she felt a little resentful, a little as if she had been forsaken, was not good enough. She went upstairs, where everything was silent. Minnie was sewing by a lamp at the table. Hanson had already turned in for the night. In her weariness and disappointment, Carrie did no more than announce that she was going to bed. "Yes, you'd better," returned Minnie. "You've got to get up early, you know." The morning was no better. Hanson was just going out the door as Carrie came from her room. Minnie tried to talk with her during breakfast, but there was not much of interest which they could mutually discuss. As on the previous morning, Carrie walked downtown, for she began to realize now that her $4.50 would not even allow her car fare after she paid her board. This seemed a miserable arrangement, but the morning light swept away the first misgivings of the day, as morning light is ever wont to do. At the shoe factory she put in a long day, scarcely so wearisome as the preceding, but considerably less novel. The head foreman, on his round, stopped by her machine. "Where did you come from?" he inquired. "Mr. Brown hired me," she replied. "Oh, he did, eh?" And then, "See that you keep things going." The machine girls impressed her even less favorably. They seemed satisfied with their lot, and were in a sense common. Carrie had more imagination than they. She was not used to slang. Her instinct in the matter of dress was naturally better. She disliked to listen to the girl next to her, who was rather hardened by experience. "I'm going to quit this," she heard her remark to her neighbor. "What with the stipend and being up late, it's too much for me health." They were free with the fellows, young and old, about the place, and exchanged banter in rude phrases which at first shocked her. She saw that she was taken to be of the same sort, and addressed accordingly. "Hello!" remarked one of the stout-wristed soul workers to her at noon. "You're a daisy." He really expected to hear the common, "Ah, go chase yourself," in return, and was sufficiently abashed by Carrie's silently moving away to retreat, awkwardly grinning. That night at the flat she was even more lonely. The dull situation was becoming harder to endure. She could see that the Hansons seldom or never had any company. Standing at the street door looking out, she ventured to walk out a little way. Her easy gait and idle manner attracted attention of an offensive but common sort. She was slightly taken back at the overtures of a well-dressed man of 30, who, in passing, looked at her, reduced his pace, turned back, and said, "Out for a little stroll, are you, this evening?" Carrie looked at him in amazement, and then summoned sufficient thought to reply, "Why, I don't know you," backing away as she did so. "Oh, that don't matter," said the other affably. She bandied no more words with him, but hurried away, reaching her own door quite out of breath. There was something in the man's look which frightened her. During the remainder of the week it was very much the same. 1 or 2 nights she found herself too tired to walk home and expended car fare. She was not very strong, and sitting all day affected her back. She went to bed one night before Hanson. Transplantation is not always successful in the matter of flowers or maidens. It requires sometimes a richer soil, a better atmosphere to continue even a natural growth. It would have been better if her acclimatization had been more gradual, less rigid. She would have done better if she had not secured a position so quickly and had seen more of the city, which she constantly troubled to know about. On the first morning it rained, she found that she had no umbrella. Minnie loaned her one of hers, which was worn and faded. There was the kind of vanity in Carrie that troubled at this. She went to one of the great department stores and bought herself one, using $1.25 of her small store to pay for it. "What did you do that for, Carrie?" asked Minnie when she saw it. "Oh, I need one," said Carrie. "You foolish girl!" Carrie resented this, though she did not reply. She was not going to be a common shop girl, she thought. They need not think it either. On the first Saturday night, Carrie paid her board, $4. Minnie had a quaver of conscience as she took it, but did not know how to explain to Hanson if she took less. That worthy gave up just $4 less toward the household expenses with a smile of satisfaction. He contemplated increasing his building and loan payments. As for Carrie, she studied over the problem of finding clothes and amusement on 50 cents a week. She brooded over this until she was in a state of mental rebellion. "I'm going up the street for a walk," she said after supper. "Not alone, are you?" asked Hanson. "Yes," returned Carrie. "I wouldn't," said Minnie. "I want to see something," said Carrie, and by the tone she put into the last word, they realized for the first time she was not pleased with them. "What's the matter with her?" asked Hanson when she went into the front room to get her hat. "I don't know," said Minnie. "Well, she ought to know better than to want to go out alone." Carrie did not go very far, after all. She returned and stood in the door. The next day they went out to Garfield Park, but it did not please her. She did not look well enough. In the shop next day she heard the highly colored reports which girls give of their trivial amusements. They had been happy. On several days it rained, and she used up car fare. One night she got thoroughly soaked going to catch the car at Van Buren Street. All that evening she sat alone in the front room looking out upon the street, where the lights were reflected on the wet pavements, thinking. She had imagination enough to be moody. On Saturday she paid another $4 and pocketed her 50 cents in despair. The speaking acquaintanceship which she formed with some of the girls at the shop discovered to her the fact that they had more of their earnings to use for themselves than she did. They had young men, of the kind whom she, since her experience with Drouet, felt above, who took them about. She came to thoroughly dislike the light-headed young fellows of the shop. Not one of them had a show of refinement. She saw only their workday side. There came a day when the first premonitory blast of winter swept over the city. It scudded the fleecy clouds in the heavens, trailed long, thin streamers of smoke from the tall stacks, and raced about the streets and corners in sharp and sudden puffs. Carrie now felt the problem of winter clothes. What was she to do? She had no winter jacket, no hat, no shoes. It was difficult to speak to Minnie about this, but at last she summoned the courage. "I don't know what I'm going to do about clothes," she said one evening when they were together. "I need a hat." Minnie looked serious. "Why don't you keep part of your money and buy yourself one?" she suggested, worried over the situation which the withholding of Carrie's money would create. "I'd like to for a week or so, if you don't mind," ventured Carrie. "Could you pay $2?" asked Minnie. Carrie readily acquiesced, glad to escape the trying situation, and liberal now that she saw a way out. She was elated and began figuring at once. She needed a hat first of all. How Minnie explained to Hanson she never knew. He said nothing at all, but there were thoughts in the air which left disagreeable impressions. The new arrangement might have worked if sickness had not intervened. It blew up cold after rain one afternoon when Carrie was still without a jacket. She came out of the warm shop at 6 and shivered as the wind struck her. In the morning she was sneezing, and going downtown made it worse. That day her bones ached and she felt light-headed. Towards evening she felt very ill, and when she reached home was not hungry. Minnie noticed her drooping actions and asked her about herself. "I don't know," said Carrie. "I feel real bad." She hung about the stove, suffered a chattering chill, and went to bed sick. The next morning she was thoroughly feverish. Minnie was truly distressed at this, but maintained a kindly demeanor. Hanson said perhaps she had better go back home for a while. When she got up after 3 days, it was taken for granted that her position was lost. The winter was near at hand, she had no clothes, and now she was out of work. "I don't know," said Carrie. "I'll go down Monday and see if I can't get something." If anything, her efforts were more poorly rewarded on this trial than the last. Her clothes were nothing suitable for fall wearing. Her last money she had spent for a hat. For 3 days she wandered about, utterly dispirited. The attitude of the flat was fast becoming unbearable. She hated to think of going back there each evening. Hanson was so cold, she knew it could not last much longer. Shortly she would have to give up and go home. On the 4th day she was downtown all day, having borrowed 10 cents for lunch from Minnie. She had applied in the cheapest kind of places without success. She even answered for a waitress in a small restaurant where she saw a card in the window, but they wanted an experienced girl. She moved through the thick throng of strangers, utterly subdued in spirit. Suddenly a hand pulled her arm and turned her about. "Well, well," said a voice. In the first glance she beheld Drouet. He was not only rosy-cheeked, but radiant. He was the essence of sunshine and good humor. "Why, how are you, Carrie?" he said. "You're a daisy. Where have you been?" Carrie smiled under his irresistible flood of geniality. "I've been out home," she said. "Well," he said, "I saw you across the street there. I thought it was you. I was just coming out to your place. How are you, anyhow?" "I'm all right," said Carrie, smiling. Drouet looked her over and saw something different. "Well," he said, "I want to talk to you. You're not going anywhere in particular, are you?" "Not just now," said Carrie. "Let's go up here and have something to eat. George, but I'm glad to see you again." She felt so relieved in his radiant presence, so much looked after and cared for, that she assented gladly, though with the slightest air of holding back. "Well," he said as he took her arm, and there was an exuberance of good fellowship in the word, which fairly warmed the cockles of her heart. They went through Monroe Street to the old Windsor dining-room, which was then a large, comfortable place, with an excellent cuisine and substantial service. Drouet selected a table close by the window, where the busy rout of the street could be seen. He loved the changing panorama of the street, to see and be seen as he dined. "Now," he said, getting Carrie and himself comfortably settled, "what will you have?" Carrie looked over the large bill of fare which the waiter handed her without really considering it. She was very hungry, and the things she saw there awakened her desires, but the high prices held her attention. Half-broiled spring chicken, 75. Sirloin steak with mushrooms, 125. She had dimly heard of these things, but it seemed strange to be called to order from the list. "I'll fix this," exclaimed Drouet. "Tst! Waiter!" That officer of the board, a full-chested, round-faced negro, approached and inclined his ear. "Sirloin with mushrooms," said Drouet. "Stuffed tomatoes." "Yes, sir," assented the negro, nodding his head. "Hashed brown potatoes." "Yes, sir." "Asparagus." "Yes, sir." "And a pot of coffee." Drouet turned to Carrie. "I haven't had a thing since breakfast. Just got in from Rock Island. I was going off to dine when I saw you." Carrie smiled and smiled. "What have you been doing?" he went on. "Tell me about yourself. How is your sister?" "She's well," returned Carrie, answering the last query. He looked at her hard. "Say," he said, "you haven't been sick, have you?" Carrie nodded. "Well now, that's a bloomin' shame, isn't it? You don't look very well. I thought you looked a little pale. What have you been doing?" "Working," said Carrie. "You don't say so. At what?" She told him. "Rhodes, Morgenthau and Scott. Why, I know that house. Over here on Fifth Avenue, isn't it? They're a close-fisted concern. What made you go there?" "I couldn't get anything else," said Carrie frankly. "Well, that's an outrage," said Drouet. "You oughtn't to be working for those people. Have the factory right back of the store, don't they?" "Yes," said Carrie. "That isn't a good house," said Drouet. "You don't want to work at anything like that, anyhow." He chattered on at a great rate, asking questions, explaining things about himself, telling her what a good restaurant it was, until the waiter returned with an immense tray, bearing the hot, savory dishes which had been ordered. Drouet fairly shone in the matter of serving. He appeared to great advantage behind the white napery and silver platters of the table, and displaying his arms with a knife and fork. As he cut the meat, his rings almost spoke. His new suit creaked as he stretched to reach the plates, break the bread, and pour the coffee. He helped Carrie to a rousing plateful, and contributed the warmth of his spirit to her body until she was a new girl. He was a splendid fellow in the true popular understanding of the term, and captivated Carrie completely. That little soldier of fortune took her good turn in an easy way. She felt a little out of place, but the great room soothed her, and the view of the well-dressed throng outside seemed a splendid thing. Ah, what was it not to have money? What a thing it was to be able to come in here and dine! Drouet must be fortunate. He rode on trains, dressed in such nice clothes, was so strong and ate in these fine places. He seemed quite a figure of a man, and she wondered at his friendship and regard for her. "So you lost your place because you got sick, eh?" he said. "What are you going to do now?" "Look around," she said, a thought of the need that hung outside this fine restaurant like a hungry dog at her heels passing into her eyes. "Oh, no," said Drouet, "that won't do. How long have you been looking?" "4 days," she answered. "Think of that," he said, addressing some problematical individual. "You oughtn't to be doing anything like that. These girls," and he waved an inclusion of all shop and factory girls, "don't get anything. Why, you can't live on it, can you?" He was a brotherly sort of creature in his demeanor. When he had scouted the idea of that kind of toil, he took another tack. Carrie was really very pretty. Even then, in her commonplace garb, her figure was evidently not bad, and her eyes were large and gentle. Drouet looked at her, and his thoughts reached home. She felt his admiration. It was powerfully backed by his liberality and good humor. She felt that she liked him, that she could continue to like him ever so much. There was something even richer than that, running as a hidden strain in her mind. Every little while her eyes would meet his, and by that means the interchanging current of feeling would be fully connected. "Why don't you stay downtown and go to the theater with me?" he said, hitching his chair closer. The table was not very wide. "Oh, I can't," she said. "What are you going to do tonight?" "Nothing," she answered a little drearily. "You don't like out there where you are, do you?" "Oh, I don't know." "What are you going to do if you don't get work?" Go back home, I guess. There was the least quaver in her voice as she said this. Somehow the influence he was exerting was powerful. They came to an understanding of each other without words, he of her situation, she of the fact that he realized it. "No," he said, "you can't make it," genuine sympathy filling his mind for the time. "Let me help you. You take some of my money." "Oh, no," she said, leaning back. "What are you going to do?" he said. She sat meditating, merely shaking her head. He looked at her quite tenderly for his kind. There were some loose bills in his vest pocket, greenbacks. They were soft and noiseless, and he got his fingers about them and crumpled them up in his hand. "Come on," he said. "I'll see you through all right. Get yourself some clothes." It was the first reference he had made to that subject, and now she realized how bad off she was. In his crude way he had struck the keynote. Her lips trembled a little. She had her hand out on the table before her. They were quite alone in their corner, and he put his larger, warmer hand over it. "Ah, come, Carrie," he said. "What can you do alone? Let me help you." He pressed her hand gently, and she tried to withdraw it. At this he held it fast, and she no longer protested. Then he slipped the greenbacks he had into her palm, and when she began to protest, he whispered, "I'll loan it to you. That's all right. I'll loan it to you." He made her take it. She felt bound to him by a strange tie of affection now. They went out, and he walked with her far out south toward Polk Street, talking. "You don't want to live with those people," he said in one place, abstractedly. Carrie heard it, but made only a slight impression. "Come down and meet me tomorrow," he said, "and we'll go to the matinee. Will you?" Carrie protested a while, but acquiesced. "You're not doing anything. Get yourself a nice pair of shoes and a jacket." She scarcely gave a thought to the complication which would trouble her when he was gone. In his presence she was of his own hopeful, easy-way-out mood. "Don't you bother about those people out there," he said at parting. "I'll help you." Carrie left him, feeling as though a great arm had slipped out before her to draw off trouble. The money she had accepted was 2 soft, green, handsome $10 bills. End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colin Spittler. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 7. The lure of the material. Beauty speaks for itself. The true meaning of money yet remains to be popularly explained and comprehended. When each individual realizes for himself that this thing primarily stands for and should only be accepted as a moral due, that it should be paid out as honestly stored energy, and not as a usurped privilege, many of our social, religious, and political troubles will have permanently passed. But for Carrie, her understanding of the moral significance of money was the popular understanding, nothing more. The old definition, money, something everybody else has and I must get, would have expressed her understanding of it thoroughly. Some of it she now held in her hand, 2 soft, green $10 bills, and she felt that she was immensely better off for the having of them. It was something that was power in itself. One of her order of mind would have been content to be cast away upon a desert island with a bundle of money, and only the long strain of starvation would have taught her that in some cases it could have no value. Even then, she would have had no conception of the relative value of the thing. Her one thought would, undoubtedly, have concerned the pity of having so much power and the inability to use it. The poor girl thrilled as she walked away from Drouet. She felt ashamed in part because she had been weak enough to take it, but her need was so dire she was still glad. Now she would have a nice new jacket. Now she would buy a nice pair of pretty button shoes. She would get stockings, too, and a skirt, and until already, as in the matter of her prospective salary, she had got beyond, in her desires, twice the purchasing power of her bills. She conceived a true estimate of Drouet. To her, and indeed to all the world, he was a nice, good-hearted man. There was nothing evil in the fellow. He gave her the money out of a good heart, out of a realization of her want. He would not have given the same amount to a poor young man, but we must not forget that a poor young man could not, in the nature of things, have appealed to him like a poor young girl. Femininity affected his feelings. He was the creature of an inborn desire, yet no beggar could have caught his eye and said, "My God, mister, I'm starving." But he would gladly have handed out what was considered the proper portion to give beggars, and thought no more about it. There would have been no speculation, no philosophizing. He had no mental process in him worthy the dignity of either of those terms. In his good clothes and fine health, he was a merry, unthinking moth of the lamp. Deprived of his position, and struck by a few of the involved and baffling forces which sometimes play upon man, he would have been as helpless as Carrie, as helpless, as non-understanding, as pitiable, if you will, as she. Now in regard to his pursuit of women, he meant them no harm, because he did not conceive of the relation which he hoped to hold them as being harmful. He loved to make advances to women, to have them succumb to his charms, not because he was a cold-blooded, dark, scheming villain, but because his inborn desire urged him to that as a chief delight. He was vain, he was boastful, he was as deluded by fine clothes as any silly-headed girl. A truly deep-dyed villain could have hornswoggled him as readily as he could have flattered a pretty shop-girl. His fine success as a salesman lay in his geniality and the thoroughly reputable standing of his house. He bobbed about among men, a veritable bundle of enthusiasm, no power worthy the name of intellect, no thoughts worthy the adjective noble, no feelings long continued in one strain. Madame Sappho would have called him a pig. A Shakespeare would have said, "My merry child." Old drinking Ario thought him a clever, successful businessman. In short, he was as good as his intellect conceived. The best proof that there was something open and commendable about the man was the fact that Carrie took the money. No deep, sinister soul with ulterior motives could have given her 15 cents under the guise of friendship. The unintellectual are not so helpless. Nature has taught the beasts of the field to fly when some unheralded danger threatens. It has put into the small, unwise head of the chipmunk the untutored fear of poisons. "He keepeth his creatures whole" was not written of beasts alone. Carrie was unwise, and therefore, like the sheep in its unwisdom, strong in feeling. The instinct of self-protection, strong in all such natures, was roused but feebly, if at all, by overtures of Drouet. When Carrie had gone, he felicitated himself upon her good opinion. By George, it was a shame young girls had to be knocked around like that. Cold weather coming on and no clothes. Tough. He would go around to Fitzgerald and Moy's and get a cigar. It made him feel light of foot as he thought about her. Carrie reached home in high good spirits, which she could scarcely conceal. The possession of the money involved a number of points which perplexed her seriously. How should she buy any clothes when Minnie knew she had no money? She had no sooner entered the flat than this point was settled for her. It could not be done. She could think of no way of explaining. "How did you come out?" asked Minnie, referring to the day. Carrie had none of the small deception which could feel one thing and say something directly opposed. She would prevaricate, but it would be in the line of her feelings at least. So, instead of complaining when she felt so good, she said, "I have the promise of something." "Where?" "At the Boston store." "Is it sure promised?" questioned Minnie. "Well, I'm to find out tomorrow," returned Carrie, disliking to draw out a lie any longer than was necessary. Minnie felt the atmosphere of good feeling which Carrie brought with her. She felt now was the time to express to Carrie the state of Hanson's feelings about her entire Chicago venture. "If you shouldn't get," she paused, troubled, for an easy way, "if I don't get something pretty soon, I think I'll go home." Minnie saw her chance. "Sven thinks it might be best winter anyhow." The situation flashed on Carrie at once. They were unwilling to keep her any longer out of work. She did not blame Minnie. She did not blame Hanson very much. Now, as she sat there digesting the remark, she was glad she had Drouet's money. "Yes," she said after a few moments, "I thought of doing that." She did not explain. The thought, however, had aroused all the antagonism of her nature. Columbia City, what was there for her? She knew its dull little round by heart. Here was the great, mysterious city which was still a magnet for her. What she had seen only suggested its possibilities. Now to turn back on it and live the little old life out there, she almost exclaimed against the thought. She had reached home early and went in the front room to think. What else could she do? She could not buy new shoes and wear them here. She would need to save part of the 20 to pay her fare home. She did not want to borrow of Minnie for that. And yet, how could she explain where she even got that money? If she could only get enough to let her out easy. She went over the tangle again and again. Here, in the morning, Drouet would expect to see her in a new jacket, and that couldn't be. The Hansons expected her to go home, and she wanted to get away, and yet she did not want to go home. In the light of the way they would look on her getting money without work. The taking of it now seemed dreadful. She began to be ashamed. The whole situation depressed her. It was all so clear when she was with Drouet. Now it was all so tangled, so hopeless, much worse than it was before, because she had the semblance of aid in her hand which she could not use. Her spirits sank so that at supper Minnie felt that she must have had another hard day. Carrie finally decided that she would give the money back. It was wrong to take it. She would go down in the morning and hunt for work. At noon she would meet Drouet as agreed and tell him. At this decision her heart sank, until she was the old Carrie of distress. Curiously, she could not hold the money in her hand without feeling some relief. Even after all her depressing conclusions, she could sweep away all thought about the matter, and then the $20 seemed a wonderful and delightful thing. Ah, money, money, money! What a thing it was to have! How plenty of it would clear away all these troubles! In the morning she got up and started out a little early. Her decision to hunt for work was moderately strong, but the money in her pocket, after all her troubling over it, made the work question the least shade less terrible. She walked into the wholesale district, but as the thought of applying came with each passing concern, her heart shrank. What a coward she was, she thought to herself. Yet she had applied so often, it would be the same old story. She walked on, and finally did go into one place, with the old result. She came out feeling that luck was against her. It was no use. Without much thinking, she reached Dearborn Street. Here was the great fair store with its multitude of delivery wagons about, its long window display, its crowd of shoppers. It readily changed her thoughts, she who was so weary of them. It was here that she had intended to come and get her new things. Now, for relief from distress, she thought she would go in and see. She would look at the jackets. There is nothing in this world more delightful than the middle state in which we mentally balance at times, possessed of the means, lured by desire, and yet deterred by the conscience or want of decision. When Carrie began wandering around the store amid the fine displays, she was in this mood. Her original experience in this same place had given her a high opinion of its merits. Now she paused at each individual bit of finery, where before she had hurried on. Her woman's heart was warm with desire for them. How she would look in this, how charming that would make her. She came upon the corset counter and paused in rich reverie as she noted the dainty concoctions of color and lace there displayed. If she would only make up her mind, she could have one of those now. She lingered in the jewelry department. She saw the earrings, the bracelets, the pins, the chains. What would she not have given if she could have had them all? She would look fine, too, if only she had some of these things. The jackets were the greatest attraction. When she entered the store, she already had her heart fixed upon the peculiar little tan jacket with large mother-of-pearl buttons, which was all the rage that fall. Still, she delighted to convince herself that there was nothing she would like better. She went about among the glass cases and racks where these things were displayed, and satisfied herself that the one she thought of was the proper one. All the time she wavered in her mind, now persuading herself that she could buy it right away if she chose, now recalling to herself the actual condition. At last the noon hour was dangerously near, and she had done nothing. She must go now and return the money. Drouet was on the corner when she came up. "Hello," he said, "where is the jacket and," looking down, "the shoes?" Carrie had thought to lead up to her decision in some intelligent way, but this swept the whole foreschemed situation by the board. "I came to tell you that I can't take the money." "Oh, that's it, is it?" he returned. "Well, you come on with me. Let's go over here to Partridge's." Carrie walked with him. Behold, the whole fabric of doubt and impossibility had slipped from her mind. She could not get at the points that were so serious, the things she was going to make plain to him. "Have you had lunch yet?" "Of course you haven't. Let's go in here." And Drouet turned into one of the very nicely finished restaurants off State Street in Monroe. "I mustn't take the money," said Carrie, after they were settled in a cozy corner and Drouet had ordered the lunch. "I can't wear those things out there. They wouldn't know where I got them." "What do you want to do?" He smiled. "Go without them?" "I think I'll go home," she said wearily. "Oh, come," he said. "You've been thinking it over too long. I'll tell you what to do. You say you can't wear them out there. Why don't you rent a furnished room and leave them in that for a week?" Carrie shook her head. Like all women, she was there to object and be convinced. It was for him to brush the doubts away and clear the path if he could. "Why are you going home?" he asked. "Oh, I can't get anything here." "They won't keep you?" he remarked intuitively. "They can't," said Carrie. "I'll tell you what to do," he said. "You come with me. I'll take care of you." Carrie heard this passively. The peculiar state which she was in made it sound like the welcome breath of an open door. Drouet seemed of her own spirit and pleasing. He was clean, handsome, well-dressed, and sympathetic. His voice was the voice of a friend. "What can you do back at Columbia City?" he went on, rousing by the words in Carrie's mind a picture of the dull world she had left. "There isn't anything down there. Chicago's the place. You can get a nice room here and some clothes, and then you can do something." Carrie looked out through the window into the busy street. There it was, the admirable great city, so fine when you are not poor. An elegant coach with a prancing pair of bays passed by, carrying in its upholstered depths a young lady. "What will you have if you go back?" asked Drouet. There was no subtle undercurrent to the question. He imagined that she would have nothing at all of the things he thought worthwhile. Carrie sat still, looking out. She was wondering what she could do. They would be expecting her to go home this week. Drouet turned to the subject of the clothes she was going to buy. "Why not get yourself a nice little jacket? You've got to have it. I'll loan you the money. You needn't worry about taking it. You can get yourself a nice room by yourself. I won't hurt you." Carrie saw the drift, but could not express her thoughts. She felt more than ever the helplessness of her case. "If I could only get something to do," she said. "Maybe you can," went on Drouet, "if you stay here. You can't if you go away. They won't let you stay out there. Now, why don't you let me get you a nice room? I won't bother you. You needn't be afraid. Then when you get fixed up, maybe you could get something." He looked at her pretty face, and it vivified his mental resources. She was a sweet little mortal to him. There was no doubt of that. She seemed to have some power back to her actions. She was not like the common run of store girls. She wasn't silly. In reality, Carrie had more imagination than he, more taste. It was a finer mental strain in her that made possible her depression and loneliness. Her poor clothes were neat, and she held her head unconsciously in a dainty way. "Do you think I could get something?" she asked. "Sure," he said, reaching over and filling her cup with tea. "I'll help you." She looked at him, and he laughed reassuringly. "Now I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go over here to Partridge's, and you'll pick out what you want. Then we'll look around for a room for you. You can leave the things there. Then we'll go to the show tonight." Carrie shook her head. "Well, you can go out to the flat then. That's all right. You don't need to stay in the room. Just take it and leave your things there." She hung in doubt about this until the dinner was over. "Let's go over and look at the jackets," he said. Together they went. In the store they found that shine and rustle of new things which immediately laid hold of Carrie's heart. Under the influence of a good dinner and Drouet's radiating presence, the scheme proposed seemed feasible. She looked about and picked a jacket like the one she had admired at the fair. When she got it in her hand, it seemed so much nicer. The saleswoman helped her on with it, and by accident it fitted perfectly. Drouet's face lightened as he saw the improvement. She looked quite smart. "That's the thing," he said. Carrie turned before the glass. She could not help feeling pleased as she looked at herself. A warm glow crept into her cheeks. "That's the thing," said Drouet. "Now pay for it." "It's $9, said Carrie. "That's all right. Take it," said Drouet. She reached in her purse and took out one of the bills. The woman asked if she would wear the coat and went off. In a few minutes she was back, and the purchase was closed. From Partridge's they went to a shoe store where Carrie was fitted for shoes. Drouet stood by, and when he saw how nice they looked, said, "Wear them." Carrie shook her head, however. She was thinking of returning to the flat. He bought her a purse for one thing, and a pair of gloves for another, and let her buy the stockings. "Tomorrow," he said, "you come down here and buy yourself a skirt." In all of Carrie's actions there was a touch of misgiving. The deeper she sank into the entanglement, the more she imagined that the thing hung upon the few remaining things she had not done. Since she had not done these things, there was a way out. Drouet knew a place in Wabash Avenue where there were rooms. He showed Carrie the outside of these, and said, "Now you're my sister." He carried the arrangement off with an easy hand when it came to the selection, looking around, criticizing, opining. "Her trunk will be here in a day or two," he observed to the landlady, who was very pleased. When they were alone, Drouet did not change in the least. He talked in the same general way as if they were out in the street. Carrie left her things. "Now," said Drouet, "why don't you move tonight?" "Oh, I can't," said Carrie. "Why not?" "I don't want to leave them so." He took that up as they walked along the avenue. It was a warm afternoon. The sun had come out, and the wind had died down. As he talked with Carrie, he secured an accurate detail of the atmosphere of the flat. "Come out of it," he said. "They won't care. I'll help you get along." She listened until her misgivings vanished. He would show her about a little, and then help her get something. He really imagined that he would. He would be out on the road, and she could be working. "Now I'll tell you what you do," he said. "You go out there, and you get whatever you want, and come away." She thought a long time about this. Finally she agreed. He would come out as far as Peoria Street and wait for her. She was to meet him at 8:30. At 5:30 she reached home, and at 6 her determination was hardened. "So you didn't get it?" said Minnie, referring to Carrie's story of the Boston store. Carrie looked at her out of the corner of her eye. "No," she answered. "I don't think you'd better try any more this fall," said Minnie. Carrie said nothing. When Hanson came home, he wore the same inscrutable demeanor. He washed in silence and went off to read his paper. At dinner, Carrie felt a little nervous. The strain of her own plans was considerable, and the feeling that she was not welcome here was strong. "Didn't find anything, eh?" said Hanson. "No." He turned to his eating again, the thought that it was a burden to have her here dwelling in his mind. She would have to go home, that was all. Once she was away, there would be no more coming back in the spring. Carrie was afraid of what she was going to do, but she was relieved to know that this condition was ending. They would not care. Hanson particularly would be glad when she went. He would not care what became of her. After dinner she went into the bathroom where they could not disturb her, and wrote a little note. "Goodbye, Minnie," it read. "I'm not going home. I'm going to stay in Chicago a little while and look for work. Don't worry, I'll be all right." In the front room Hanson was reading his paper. As usual, she helped Minnie clear away the dishes and straighten up. Then she said, "I guess I'll stand down at the door a little while." She could scarcely prevent her voice from trembling. Minnie remembered Hanson's remonstrance. "Sven doesn't think it looks good to stand down there," she said. "Doesn't he?" said Carrie. "I won't do it any more after this." She put on her hat and fidgeted around the table in her little bedroom, wondering where to slip the note. Finally she put it under Minnie's hairbrush. When she had closed the hall door, she paused a moment and wondered what they would think. Some thought of the queerness of her deed affected her. She went slowly down the stairs. She looked back up the lighted step, and then affected to stroll up the street. When she reached the corner, she quickened her pace. As she was hurrying away, Hanson came back to his wife. "Is Carrie down at the door again?" he asked. "Yes," said Minnie. "She said she wasn't going to do it any more." He went over to the baby where it was playing on the floor and began to poke his finger at it. Drouet was on the corner waiting, in good spirits. "Hello, Carrie," he said, as a sprightly figure of a girl drew near him. "Got here safe, did you? Well, we'll take a car." End of Chapter 7. Recording by Colin Spittler, Three Oaks, Michigan. Chapter 8 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colin Spittler. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 8. Intimations by Winter, an ambassador summoned. Among the forces which sweep and play throughout the universe, untutored man is but a wisp in the wind. Our civilization is still in a middle stage, scarcely beast, in that it is no longer wholly guided by instinct, scarcely human, in that it is not yet wholly guided by reason. On the tiger no responsibility rests. We see him aligned by nature with the forces of life. He is born into their keeping, and without thought he is protected. We see man far removed from the lairs of the jungles, his innate instincts dulled by too near an approach to free will, his free will not sufficiently developed to replace his instincts and afford him perfect guidance. He is becoming too wise to hearken always to instincts and desires. He is still too weak to always prevail against them. As a beast, the forces of life aligned him with them. As a man, he has not yet wholly learned to align himself with the forces. In this intermediate stage he wavers, neither drawn in harmony with nature by his instincts, nor yet wisely putting himself into harmony by his own free will. He is even as a wisp in the wind, moved by every breath of passion, acting now by his will and now by his instincts, erring with one only to retrieve by the other, falling by one only to rise by the other, a creature of incalculable variability. We have the consolation of knowing that evolution is ever in action, that the ideal is a light that cannot fail. He will not forever balance thus between good and evil. When this jangle of free will and instinct shall have been adjusted, when perfect understanding has given the former the power to replace the latter entirely, man will no longer vary. The needle of understanding will yet point steadfast and unwavering to the distant pole of truth. In Carrie, as in how many of our worldlings do they not? Instinct and reason, desire and understanding were at war for the mastery. She followed whither her craving led. She was as yet more drawn than she drew. When Minnie found the note next morning, after a night of mingled wonder and anxiety, which was not exactly touched by yearning, sorrow, or love, she exclaimed, "Well, what do you think of that?" "What?" said Hanson. "Sister Carrie has gone to live somewhere else." Hanson jumped out of bed with more celerity than he usually displayed, and looked at the note. The only indication of his thoughts came in the form of a little clicking sound made by his tongue, the sound some people make when they wish to urge on a horse. "Where do you suppose she's gone to?" said Minnie, thoroughly aroused. "I don't know," a touch of cynicism lighting his eye. "Now she's gone and done it." Minnie moved her head in a puzzled way. "Uh-oh," she said. "She doesn't know what she has done." "Well," said Hanson after a while, sticking his hands up before him, "what can we do?" Minnie's womanly nature was higher than this. She figured the possibilities in such cases. "Oh," she said at last, "poor Sister Carrie." At the time of this particular conversation, which occurred at 5 a.m., that little soldier of fortune was sleeping a rather troubled sleep in her new room, alone. Carrie's new state was remarkable in that she saw possibilities in it. She was no sensualist, longing to drowse sleepily in the lap of luxury. She turned about, troubled by her daring, glad of her release, wondering whether she would get something to do, wondering what Drouet would do. That worthy had his future fixed for him beyond a peradventure. He could not help what he was going to do. He could not see clearly enough to wish to do differently. He was drawn by his innate desire to act the old pursuing part. He would need to delight himself with Carrie as surely as he would need to eat his heavy breakfast. He might suffer the least rudimentary twinge of conscience in whatever he did, and in just so far he was evil and sinning. But whatever twinges of conscience he might have would be rudimentary, you might be sure. The next day he called upon Carrie, and she saw him in her chamber. He was the same jolly, enlivening soul. "Ah," he said, "what are you looking so blue about? Come on out to breakfast. You want to get your other clothes today." Carrie looked at him with the hue of shifting thought in her large eyes. "I wish I could get something to do," she said. "You'll get that all right," said Drouet. "What's the use worrying right now? Get yourself fixed up. See the city. I won't hurt you." "I know you won't," she remarked, half-truthfully. "Got on the new shoes, haven't you? Stick 'em out. George, they look fine. Put on your jacket." Carrie obeyed. "Say, that fits like a T, don't it?" he remarked, feeling the set of it at the waist, and eyeing it from a few paces with real pleasure. "What you need now is a new skirt. Let's go to breakfast." Carrie put on her hat. "Where are the gloves?" he inquired. "Here," she said, taking them out of the bureau drawer. "Now come on," he said. Thus the first hour of misgivings was swept away. It went this way on every occasion. Drouet did not leave her much alone. She had time for some lone wanderings, but mostly he filled her hours with sightseeing. At Carson Peary's he bought her a nice skirt and shirtwaist. With his money she purchased the little necessities of toilette, until at last she looked quite another maiden. The mirror convinced her of a few things which she had long believed. She was pretty, yes, indeed. How nice her hat set, and weren't her eyes pretty? She caught her little red lip with her teeth, and felt her first thrill of power. Drouet was so good. They went to see The Mikado one evening, an opera which was hilariously popular at the time. Before going, they made off for the Windsor dining-room, which was in Dearborn Street, a considerable distance from Carrie's room. It was blowing up cold, and out of her window Carrie could see the western sky, still pink with the fading light, but steely blue at the top where it met the darkness. A long, thin cloud of pink hung in mid-air, shaped like some island in a far-off sea. Somehow the swaying of some dead branches of trees across the way brought back the picture with which she was familiar when she looked from their front window in December days at home. She paused and wrung her little hands. "What's the matter?" said Drouet. "Oh, I don't know," she said, her lip trembling. He sensed something and slipped his arm over her shoulder, patting her arm. "Come on," he said gently, "you'll be all right." She turned to slip on her jacket. "Better wear that boa about your throat tonight." They walked north on Wabash to Adams Street, and then west. The lights in the stores were already shining out in gushes of golden hue. The arc lights were sputtering overhead, and high up were the lighted windows of the tall office buildings. The chill wind whipped in and out in gusty breaths. Homeward bound, the 6 o'clock throng bumped and jostled. Light overcoats were turned up about the ears, hats were pulled down. Little shop girls went fluttering by in pairs and fours, chattering, laughing. It was a spectacle of warm-blooded humanity. Suddenly a pair of eyes met Carrie's in recognition. They were looking out from a group of poorly dressed girls. Their clothes were faded and loose-hanging, their jackets old, their general make-up shabby. Carrie recognized the glance and the girl. She was one of those who worked at the machines in the shoe factory. The latter looked, not quite sure, and then turned her head and looked. Carrie felt as if some great tide had rolled between them. The old dress and the old machine came back. She actually started. Drouet hadn't noticed until Carrie bumped into a pedestrian. "You must be thinking," he said. They dined and went to the theater. That spectacle pleased Carrie immensely. The color and grace of it caught her eye. She had vain imaginings about place and power, about far-off lands and magnificent people. When it was over, the clatter of coaches and the throng of fine ladies made her stare. "Wait a minute," said Drouet, holding her back in the showy foyer where ladies and gentlemen were moving in a social crush, skirts rustling, lace-covered heads nodding, white teeth showing through parted lips. "Let's see." 67, the coach caller was saying, his voice lifted in a sort of euphonious cry. 67. "Isn't it fine?" said Carrie. "Great," said Drouet. He was as much affected by this show of finery and gaiety as she. He pressed her arm warmly. Once she looked up, her even teeth glistening through her smiling lips, her eyes alight. As they were moving out, he whispered down to her, "You look lovely." They were right where the coach caller was swinging open a coach door and ushering in two ladies. "You stick to me and we'll have a coach," laughed Drouet. Carrie scarcely heard. Her head was so full of the swirl of life. They stopped in at a restaurant for a little after-dinner lunch. Just a shade of a thought of the hour entered Carrie's head, but there was no household law to govern her now. If any habits ever had time to fix upon her, they would have operated here. Habits are peculiar things. They will drive the really non-religious mind out of bed to say prayers that are only a custom and not a devotion. The victim of habit, when he has neglected the thing which it was his custom to do, feels a little scratching in the brain, a little irritating something which comes of being out of the rut, and imagines it to be the prick of conscience, the still small voice that is urging him ever to righteousness. If the digression is unusual enough, the drag of habit will be heavy enough to cause the unreasoning victim to return and perform the perfunctory thing. "Now bless me," says such a mind, "I have done my duty," when, as a matter of fact, it has merely done its old, unbreakable trick once again. Carrie had no excellent home principles fixed upon her. If she had, she would have been more consciously distressed. Now the lunch went off with considerable warmth. Under the influence of the varied occurrences, the fine, invisible passion which was emanating from Drouet, the food, the still, unusual luxury, she relaxed and heard with open ears. She was again the victim of the city's hypnotic influence. "Well," said Drouet at last, "we had better be going." They had been dawdling over the dishes, and their eyes had frequently met. Carrie could not help but feel the vibration of force which followed, which indeed was his gaze. He had a way of touching her hand in explanation, as if to impress a fact upon her. He touched it now as he spoke of going. They arose and went out into the street. The downtown section was now bare, save for a few whistling strollers, a few owl carts, a few open resorts whose windows were still bright. Out Wabash Avenue they strolled. Drouet still poured forth his volume of small information. He had Carrie's arm in his, and held it closely as he explained. Once in a while, after some witticism, he would look down, and his eyes would meet hers. At last they came to the steps, and Carrie stood up on the first one, her head now coming even with his own. He took her hand and held it genially. He looked steadily at her as she glanced about, warmly musing. At about that hour, Minnie was soundly sleeping after a long evening of troubled thought. She had her elbow in an awkward position under her side. The muscles so held irritated a few nerves, and now a vague scene floated in on the drowsy mind. She fancied she and Carrie were somewhere beside an old coal mine. She could see the tall runway and the heap of earth and coal cast out. There was a deep pit, into which they were looking. They could see the curious wet stones far down, where the wall disappeared in vague shadows. An old basket used for descending was hanging there, fastened by a worn rope. "Let's get in," said Carrie. "Oh, no," said Minnie. "Yes, come on," said Carrie. She began to pull the basket over, and now, in spite of all protest, she had swung over and was going down. "Carrie," she called, "Carrie, come back." But Carrie was far down now, and the shadows had swallowed her completely. She moved her arm. Now the mystic scenery merged queerly, and the place was by waters she had never seen. They were upon some board or ground or something that reached far out, and at the end of this was Carrie. They looked about, and now the thing was sinking, and Minnie heard the low sip of the encroaching water. "Come on, Carrie," she called, but Carrie was reaching farther out. She seemed to recede, and now it was difficult to call her. "Carrie," she called, "Carrie!" But her own voice sounded far away, and the strange waters were blurring everything. She came away suffering, as though she had lost something. She was more inexpressibly sad than she had ever been in her life. It was this way through many shifts of the tired brain, those curious phantoms of the spirit slipping in, blurring strange scenes, one with another. The last one made her cry out, for Carrie was slipping away somewhere over a rock, and her fingers had let loose, and she had seen her falling. "Minnie, what's the matter? Here, wake up," said Hanson, disturbed, and shaking her by the shoulder. What's the matter?" said Minnie drowsily. "Wake up," he said, "and turn over. You're talking in your sleep." A week or so later, Drouet strolled into Fitzgerald and Moy's, spruce in dress and manner. "Hello, Charlie," said Hurstwood, looking out from his office door. Drouet strolled over and looked in upon the manager at his desk. "When do you go out on the road again?" he inquired. "Pretty soon," said Drouet. "Haven't seen much of you this trip," said Hurstwood. "Well, I've been busy," said Drouet. They talked some few minutes on general topics. "Say," said Drouet, as if struck by a sudden idea, "I want you to come out some evening." "Out where?" inquired Hurstwood. "Out to my house, of course," said Drouet, smiling. Hurstwood looked up quizzically, the least suggestion of a smile hovering about his lips. He studied the face of Drouet in his wise way, and then with the demeanor of a gentleman said, "Certainly, glad to. We'll have a nice game of euchre." "May I bring a nice bottle of sec?" asked Hurstwood. "Certainly," said Drouet. "I'll introduce you." End of Chapter 8. Recording by Colin Spittler, Three Oaks, Michigan. Chapter 9 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colin Spittler. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 9. Convention's Own Tinderbox. The Eye That Is Green. Hurstwood's residence on the north side, near Lincoln Park, was a brick building of a very popular type then, a 3-story affair with the first floor sunk a very little below the level of the street. It had a large bay window bulging out from the second floor, and was graced in front by a small grassy plot, 25 feet wide and 10 feet deep. There was also a small rear yard, walled in by the fences of the neighbors and holding a stable where he kept his horse and trap. The 10 rooms of the house were occupied by himself, his wife Julia, and his son and daughter, George Jr. and Jessica. There were besides these a maidservant, represented from time to time by girls of various extraction, for Mrs. Hurstwood was not always easy to please. "George, I let Mary go yesterday," was not an unfrequent salutation at the dinner-table. "All right," was his only reply. He had long since wearied of discussing the rancorous subject. A lovely home atmosphere is one of the flowers of the world, than which there is nothing more tender, nothing more delicate, nothing more calculated to make strong and just the natures cradled and nourished within it. Those who have never experienced such a beneficent influence will not understand wherefore the tear springs, glistening to the eyelids, at some strange breath in lovely music. The mystic chords which bind and thrill the heart of the nation, they will never know. Hurstwood's residence could scarcely be said to be infused with this home spirit. It lacked that toleration and regard without which the home is nothing. There was fine furniture arranged as soothingly as the artistic perception of the occupants warranted. There were soft rugs, rich upholstered chairs and divans, a grand piano, a marble carving of some unknown Venus by some unknown artist, and a number of small bronzes gathered from heaven knows where, but generally sold by the large furniture houses, along with everything else that goes to make the perfectly appointed house. In the dining room stood a sideboard laden with glistening decanters and other utilities and ornaments in glass, the arrangement of which could not be questioned. Here was something Hurstwood knew about. He had studied the subject for years in his business. He had no little satisfaction in telling each Mary, shortly after she arrived, something of what the art of the thing required. He was not garrulous by any means. On the contrary, there was a fine reserve in his manner toward the entire domestic economy of his life, which was all that is comprehended by the popular term gentlemanly. He would not argue. He would not talk freely. In his manner was something of the dogmatist. What he could not correct he would ignore. There was a tendency in him to walk away from the impossible thing. There was a time when he had been considerably enamored of his Jessica, especially when he was younger and more confined in his success. Now, however, in her 17th year, Jessica had developed a certain amount of reserve and independence which was not inviting to the richest form of parental devotion. She was in the high school, and had notions of life which were decidedly those of a patrician. She liked nice clothes, and urged for them constantly. Thoughts of love and elegant individual establishments were running in her head. She met girls at the high school whose parents were truly rich, and whose fathers had standing locally as partners or owners of solid businesses. These girls gave themselves the airs befitting the thriving domestic establishments from whence they issued. They were the only ones of the school about whom Jessica concerned herself. Young Hurstwood, Jr. was in his 20th year, and was already connected in a promising capacity with a large real estate firm. He contributed nothing for the domestic expenses of the family, but was thought to be saving his money to invest in real estate. He had some ability, considerable vanity, and a love of pleasure that had not, as yet, infringed upon his duties, whatever they were. He came in and went out, pursuing his own plans and fancies, addressing a few words to his mother occasionally, relating some little incident to his father, but for the most part confining himself to those generalities with which most conversation concerns itself. He was not laying bare his desires for anyone to see. He did not find anyone in the house who particularly cared to see. Mrs. Hurstwood was the type of woman who has ever endeavored to shine, and has been more or less chagrined at the evidences of superior capability in this direction elsewhere. Her knowledge of life extended to that little conventional round of society of which she was not, but longed to be, a member. She was not without realization already that this thing was impossible, so far as she was concerned. For her daughter she hoped better things. Through Jessica she might rise a little. Through George Jr.'s possible success she might draw herself to the privilege of pointing proudly. Even Hurstwood was doing well enough, and she was anxious that his small real estate adventures should prosper. His property holdings as yet were rather small, but his income was pleasing, and his position with Fitzgerald and Moy was fixed. Both these gentlemen were on pleasant and rather informal terms with him. The atmosphere which such personalities would create must be apparent to all. It worked out in 1,000 little conversations, all of which were of the same caliber. "I'm going to Fox Lake tomorrow," announced George Jr. at the dinner table one Friday evening. "What's going on up there?" queried Mrs. Hurstwood. "Eddie Farway's got a new steam launch, and he wants me to come up and see how it works." "How much did it cost him?" asked his mother. "Oh, over $2,000. He says it's a dandy." "Old Farway must be making money," put in Hurstwood. He is, I guess. Jack told me they were shipping Vegacura to Australia now. Said they sent a whole box to Cape Town last week. Just think of that, said Mrs. Hurstwood, and only 4 years ago they had that basement in Madison Street. Jack told me they were going to put up a 6-story building next spring in Roby Street. Just think of that, said Jessica. On this particular occasion Hurstwood wished to leave early. I guess I'll be going downtown, he remarked, rising. Aren't we going to McVicker's Monday? Questioned Mrs. Hurstwood without rising. Yes, he said indifferently. They went on dining while he went upstairs for his hat and coat. Presently the door clicked. I guess Papa's gone, said Jessica. The latter's school news was of a particular stripe. They're going to give a performance in the Lyceum upstairs, she reported one day, and I'm going to be in it. Are you? Said her mother. Yes, and I'll have to have a new dress. Some of the nicest girls in the school are going to be in it. Miss Palmer is going to take the part of Portia. Is she? Said Mrs. Hurstwood. They've got that Martha Griswold in it again. She thinks she can act. Her family doesn't amount to anything, does it? Said Mrs. Hurstwood sympathetically. They haven't anything, have they? No, returned Jessica. They're poor as church mice. She distinguished very carefully between the young boys of the school, many of whom were attracted by her beauty. What do you think, she remarked to her mother one evening, that Herbert Crane tried to make friends with me? Who is he, my dear? Inquired Mrs. Hurstwood. Oh, no one, said Jessica, pursing her pretty lips. He's just a student there. He hasn't anything. The other half of this picture came when young Blyford, son of Blyford, the soap manufacturer, walked home with her. Mrs. Hurstwood was on the 3rd floor, sitting in a rocking-chair reading, and happened to look out at the time. Who was that with you, Jessica? She inquired, as Jessica came upstairs. It's Mr. Blyford, Mamma, she replied. Is it? Said Mrs. Hurstwood. Yes, and he wants me to stroll over into the park with him, explained Jessica, a little flushed with running up the stairs. All right, my dear, said Mrs. Hurstwood. Don't be gone long. As the two went down the street, she glanced interestedly out of the window. It was a most satisfactory spectacle indeed, most satisfactory. In this atmosphere Hurstwood had moved for a number of years, not thinking deeply concerning it. His was not the order of nature to trouble for something better, unless the better was immediately and sharply contrasted. As it was, he received and gave, irritated sometimes by the little displays of selfish indifference, pleased at times by some show of finery which supposedly made for dignity and social distinction. The life of the resort which he managed was his life. There he spent most of his time. When he went home evenings, the house looked nice. With rare exceptions, the meals were acceptable, being the kind that an ordinary servant can arrange. In part he was interested in the talk of his son and daughter, who always looked well. The vanity of Mrs. Hurstwood caused her to keep her person rather showily arrayed, but to Hurstwood this was much better than plainness. There was no love lost between them. There was no great feeling of dissatisfaction. Her opinion on any subject was not startling. They did not talk enough together to come to the argument of any one point. In the accepted and popular phrase, she had her ideas, and he had his. Once in a while he would meet a woman whose youth, sprightliness, and humor would make his wife seem rather deficient by contrast, but the temporary dissatisfaction which such an encounter might arouse would be counterbalanced by his social position and a certain manner of policy. He could not complicate his home life because it might affect his relations with his employers. They wanted no scandals. A man, to hold his position, must have a dignified manner, a clean record, a respectable home anchorage. Therefore he was circumspect in all he did, and whenever he appeared in the public ways in the afternoon, or on Sunday, it was with his wife, and sometimes his children. He would visit the local resorts, or those nearby in Wisconsin, and spend a few stiff, polished days strolling about conventional places doing conventional things. He knew the need of it. When someone of the many middle-class individuals whom he knew, who had money, would get into trouble, he would shake his head. It didn't do to talk about those things. If it came up for discussion among such friends as with him passed for close, he would deprecate the folly of things. It was all right to do it. All men do those things, but why wasn't he careful? A man can't be too careful. He lost sympathy for the man that made a mistake and was found out. On this account he still devoted some time to showing his wife about, time which would have been wearisome indeed if it had not been for the people he would meet, and the little enjoyments which did not depend upon her presence or absence. He watched her with considerable curiosity at times, for she was still attractive in a way, and men looked at her. She was affable, vain, subject to flattery, and this combination, he knew quite well, might produce a tragedy in a woman of her home position. Owing to his order of mind, his confidence in the sex was not great. His wife never possessed the virtues which would win the confidence and admiration of a man of his nature. As long as she loved him vigorously, he could see how confidence could be, but when that was no longer the binding chain, well, something might happen. During the last year or two, the expenses of the family seemed a large thing. Jessica wanted fine clothes, and Mrs. Hurstwood, not to be outshone by her daughter, also frequently enlivened her apparel. Hurstwood had said nothing in the past, but one day he murmured, "Jessica must have a new dress this month," said Mrs. Hurstwood one morning. Hurstwood was arraying himself in one of his perfection vests before the glass at the time. "I thought she just bought one," he said. "That was just something for evening wear," returned his wife complacently. "It seems to me," returned Hurstwood, "that she's spending a good deal for dresses of late." "Well, she's going out more," concluded his wife, but the tone of his voice impressed her as containing something she had not heard there before. He was not a man who traveled much, but when he did, he had been accustomed to take her along. On one occasion recently, a local aldermanic junket had been arranged to visit Philadelphia, a junket that was to last 10 days. Hurstwood had been invited. "Nobody knows us down there," said one, a gentleman whose face was a slight improvement over gross ignorance and sensuality. He always wore a silk hat of most imposing proportions. "We can have a good time." His left eye moved with the semblance of a wink. "You want to come along, George?" The next day Hurstwood announced his intention to his wife. "I'm going away, Julia," he said, "for a few days." "Where?" she asked, looking up. "To Philadelphia, on business." She looked at him consciously, expecting something else. "I'll have to leave you behind this time." "All right," she replied, but he could see that she was thinking that it was a curious thing. Before he went, she asked him a few more questions, and that irritated him. He began to feel that she was a disagreeable attachment. On this trip he enjoyed himself thoroughly, and when it was over he was sorry to get back. He was not willingly a prevaricator, and hated thoroughly to make explanations concerning it. The whole incident was glossed over with general remarks, but Mrs. Hurstwood gave the subject considerable thought. She drove out more, dressed better, and attended theaters freely to make up for it. Such an atmosphere could hardly come under the category of home life. It ran along by force of habit, by force of conventional opinion. With the lapse of time, it must necessarily become drier and drier, must eventually be tender, easily lighted, and destroyed. End of Chapter 9. Recording by Colin Spittler, Three Oaks, Michigan.
Chapter 10 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carrie Bradfield. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 10. The Council of Winter. Fortune's Ambassador Calls. In the light of the world's attitude toward women and her duties, the nature of Carrie's mental state deserves consideration. Actions such as hers are measured by an arbitrary scale. Society possesses a conventional standard whereby it judges all things. All men should be good, all women virtuous. Wherefore, villain, hast thou failed? For all the liberal analysis of Spencer and our modern naturalistic philosophers, we have but an infantile perception of morals. There is more in the subject than mere conformity to a law of evolution. It is yet deeper than conformity to things of earth alone. It is more involved than we as yet perceive. Answer, first, why the heart thrills. Explain wherefore some plaintive note goes wandering about the world, undying. Make clear the rose's subtle alchemy, evolving its ruddy lamp in light and rain. In the essence of these facts lie the first principles of morals. Oh, thought Drouet, how delicious is my conquest. Ah, thought Carrie, with mournful misgivings, what is it I have lost? Before this world-old proposition we stand, serious, interested, confused, endeavoring to evolve the true theory of morals, the true answer to what is right. In the view of a certain stratum of society, Carrie was comfortably established. In the eyes of the starveling, beaten by every wind and gusty sheet of rain, she was safe in a halcyon harbor. Drouet had taken 3 rooms, furnished, in Ogden Place, facing Union Park on the west side. That was a little, green-carpeted breathing spot than which today there is nothing more beautiful in Chicago. It afforded a vista pleasant to contemplate. The best room looked out upon the lawn of the park, now sere and brown, where a little lake lay sheltered. Over the bare limbs of the trees, which now swayed in the wintry wind, rose the steeple of the Union Park Congregational Church, and far off the towers of several others. The rooms were comfortably enough furnished. There was a good Brussels carpet on the floor, rich in dull red and lemon shades, and representing large jardinières filled with gorgeous, impossible flowers. There was a large pier-glass mirror between the 2 windows. A large, soft, green, plush-covered couch occupied one corner, and several rocking chairs were set about. Some pictures, several rugs, a few small pieces of bric-a-brac, and the tale of contents is told. In the bedroom off the front room was Carrie's trunk, bought by Drouet, and in the wardrobe built into the wall quite an array of clothing, more than she had ever possessed before, and of very becoming designs. There was a 3rd room for possible use as a kitchen, where Drouet had Carrie establish a little portable gas stove for the preparation of small lunches, oysters, Welsh rarebits, and the like, of which he was exceedingly fond, and lastly a bath. The whole place was cozy, in that it was lighted by gas and heated by furnace registers, possessing also a small grate set with an asbestos back, a method of cheerful warming which was then first coming into use. By her industry and natural love of order which now developed, the place maintained an air pleasing in the extreme. Here, then, was Carrie, established in a pleasant fashion, free of certain difficulties which most ominously confronted her, laden with many new ones which were of a mental order, and altogether so turned about in all of her earthly relationships that she might well have been a new and different individual. She looked into her glass and saw a prettier Carrie than she had seen before. She looked into her mind, a mirror prepared of her own and the world's opinions, and saw a worse. Between these 2 images she wavered, hesitating which to believe. "My, but you're a little beauty," Drouet was wont to exclaim to her. She would look at him with large, pleased eyes. "You know it, don't you?" he would continue. "Oh, I don't know," she would reply, feeling delight in the fact that one should think so, hesitating to believe, though she really did, that she was vain enough to think so much of herself. Her conscience, however, was not a Drouet interested to praise. There she heard a different voice, with which she argued, pleaded, excused. It was no just and sapient counselor in its last analysis. It was only an average little conscience, a thing which represented the world, her past environment, habit, convention, in a confused way. With it the voice of the people was truly the voice of God. "O thou failure," said the voice. "Why?" she questioned. "Look at those about," came the whispered answer. "Look at those who are good. How would they scorn to do what you have done? Look at the good girls. How will they draw away from such as you when they know you have been weak? You had not tried before you failed." It was when Carrie was alone, looking out across the park, that she would be listening to this. It would come infrequently, when something else did not interfere, when the pleasant side was not too apparent, when Drouet was not there. It was somewhat clear in utterance at first, but never wholly convincing. There was always an answer, always the December days threatened. She was alone, she was desireful, she was fearful of the whistling wind. The voice of want made answer for her. Once the bright days of summer pass by, a city takes on that sombre garb of gray, wrapped in which it goes about its labors during the long winter. Its endless buildings look gray. Its sky and its streets assume a sombre hue. The scattered leafless trees and wind-blown dust and paper but add to the general solemnity of color. There seems to be something in the chill breezes which scurry through the long, narrow thoroughfares, productive of rueful thoughts. Not poets alone, nor artists, nor that superior order of mind which arrogates to itself all refinement, feel this, but dogs and all men. These feel as much as the poet, though they have not the same power of expression. The sparrow upon the wire, the cat in the doorway, the dray horse tugging his weary load, feel the long, keen breaths of winter. It strikes to the heart of all life, animate and inanimate. If it were not for the artificial fires of merriment, the rush of profit-seeking trade, and pleasure-selling amusements, if the various merchants failed to make the customary display within and without their establishments, if our streets were not strung with signs of gorgeous hues and thronged with hurrying purchasers, we would quickly discover how firmly the chill hand of winter lays upon the heart, how dispiriting are the days during which the sun withholds a portion of our allowance of light and warmth. We are more dependent upon these things than is often thought. We are insects produced by heat, and pass without it. In the drag of such a gray day, the secret voice would reassert itself, feebly and more feebly. Such mental conflict was not always uppermost. Carrie was not by any means a gloomy soul. More, she had not the mind to get firm hold upon a definite truth. When she could not find her way out of the labyrinth of ill logic which thought upon the subject created, she would turn away entirely. Drouet, all the time, was conducting himself in a model way for one of his sort. He took her about a great deal, spent money upon her, and when he traveled, took her with him. There were times when she would be alone for 2 or 3 days, while he made the shorter circuits of his business, but, as a rule, she saw a great deal of him. "Say, Carrie," he said one morning, shortly after they had so established themselves, "I've invited my friend Hurstwood to come out some day and spend the evening with us." "Who is he?" asked Carrie, doubtfully. "Oh, he's a nice man. He's manager of Fitzgerald and Moyes." "What's that?" said Carrie. "The finest resort in town. It's a way up, swell place." Carrie puzzled a moment. She was wondering what Drouet had told him, what her attitude would be. "That's all right," said Drouet, feeling her thought. "He doesn't know anything. You are Mrs. Drouet now." There was something about this which struck Carrie as slightly inconsiderate. She could see that Drouet did not have the keenest sensibilities. "Why don't we get married?" she inquired, thinking of the voluble promises he had made. "Well, we will," he said, "just as soon as I get this little deal of mine closed up." He was referring to some property which he said he had, and which required so much attention, adjustment, and what not, that somehow or other it interfered with his free moral personal actions. "Just as soon as I get back from my Denver trip in January, we'll do it." Carrie accepted this as basis for hope. It was a sort of salve to her conscience, a pleasant way out. Under the circumstances, things would be righted. Her actions would be justified. She really was not enamored of Drouet. She was more clever than he. In a dim way she was beginning to see where he lacked. If it had not been for this, if she had not been able to measure and judge him in a way, she would have been worse off than she was. She would have adored him. She would have been utterly wretched in her fear of not gaining his affection, of losing his interest, of being swept away and left without an anchorage. As it was, she wavered a little, slightly anxious, at first, to gain him completely. But later, feeling at ease and waiting, she was not exactly sure what she thought of him, what she wanted to do. When Hurstwood called, she met a man who was more clever than Drouet in 100 ways. He paid that peculiar deference to women which every member of the sex appreciates. He was not overawed, he was not overbold. His great charm was attentiveness. Schooled in winning those birds of a fine feather among his own sex, the merchants and professionals who visited his resort, he could use even greater tact when endeavoring to prove agreeable to someone who charmed him. In a pretty woman of any refinement of feeling whatsoever, he found his greatest incentive. He was mild, placid, assured, giving the impression that he wished to be of service only, to do something which would make the lady more pleased. Drouet had ability in this line himself, when the game was worth the candle, but he was too much the egotist to reach the polish which Hurstwood possessed. He was too buoyant, too full of ruddy life, too assured. He succeeded with many who were not quite schooled in the art of love. He failed dismally where the woman was slightly experienced and possessed innate refinement. In the case of Carrie, he found a woman who was all of the latter, but none of the former. He was lucky in the fact that opportunity tumbled into his lap, as it were. A few years later, with a little more experience, the slightest tide of success, and he had not been able to approach Carrie at all. "You ought to have a piano here, Drouet," said Hurstwood, smiling at Carrie on the evening in question, "so that your wife could play." Drouet had not thought of that. "So we ought," he observed readily. "Oh, I don't play," ventured Carrie. "It isn't very difficult," returned Hurstwood. "You could do very well in a few weeks." He was in the best form for entertaining this evening. His clothes were particularly new and rich in appearance. The coat lapel stood out with that medium stiffness which excellent cloth possesses. The vest was of a rich Scotch plaid, set with a double row of round mother-of-pearl buttons. His cravat was a shiny combination of silken threads, not loud, not inconspicuous. What he wore did not strike the eye so forcibly as that which Drouet had on, but Carrie could see the elegance of the material. Hurstwood's shoes were of soft black calf, polished only to a dull shine. Drouet wore patent leather, but Carrie could not help feeling that there was a distinction in favor of the soft leather, where all else was so rich. She noticed these things almost unconsciously. They were things which would naturally flow from the situation. She was used to Drouet's appearance. "Suppose we have a little game of euchre," suggested Hurstwood, after a light round of conversation. He was rather dexterous in avoiding everything that would suggest he knew anything of Carrie's past. He kept away from personalities altogether, and confined himself to those things which did not concern individuals at all. By his manner he put Carrie at her ease, and by his deference and pleasantries he amused her. He pretended to be seriously interested in all she said. "I don't know how to play," said Carrie. "Charlie, you are neglecting a part of your duty," he observed to Drouet most affably. "Between us, though," he went on, "we can show you." By his tact he made Drouet feel that he admired his choice. There was something in his manner that showed he was pleased to be there. Drouet felt really closer to him than ever before. It gave him more respect for Carrie. Her appearance came into a new light under Hurstwood's appreciation. The situation livened considerably. "Now let me see," said Hurstwood, looking over Carrie's shoulder deferentially. "What have you—" He studied for a moment. "That's rather good," he said. "You're lucky. Now I'll show you how to trounce your husband. You take my advice." "Here," said Drouet, "if you two are going to scheme together, I won't stand a ghost of a show. Hurstwood's a regular sharp." "No, it's your wife. She brings me luck. Why shouldn't she win?" Carrie looked gratefully at Hurstwood and smiled at Drouet. The former took the air of a mere friend. He was simply there to enjoy himself. Anything that Carrie did was pleasing to him, nothing more. "There," he said, holding back one of his own good cards and giving Carrie a chance to take a trick. "I count that clever playing for a beginner." The latter laughed gleefully as she saw the hand coming her way. It was as if she were invincible when Hurstwood helped her. He did not look at her often. When he did, it was with a mild light in his eye. Not a shade was there of anything save geniality and kindness. He took back the shifty, clever gleam and replaced it with one of innocence. Carrie could not guess but that it was pleasure with him in the immediate thing. She felt that he considered she was doing a great deal. "It is unfair to let such playing go without earning something," he said after a time, slipping his finger into the little coin pocket of his coat. "Let's play for dimes." "All right," said Drouet, fishing for bills. Hurstwood was quicker. His fingers were full of new 10-cent pieces. "Here we are," he said, supplying each one with a little stack. "Oh, this is gambling," smiled Carrie. "It's bad." "No," said Drouet, "only fun. If you never play for more than that, you will go to heaven." "Don't you moralize," said Hurstwood to Carrie gently, "until you see what becomes of the money." Drouet smiled. "If your husband gets them, he'll tell you how bad it is." Drouet laughed loud. There was such an ingratiating tone about Hurstwood's voice, the insinuation was so perceptible that even Carrie got the humor of it. "When do you leave?" said Hurstwood to Drouet. "On Wednesday," he replied. "It's rather hard to have your husband running about like that, isn't it?" said Hurstwood, addressing Carrie. "She's going along with me this time," said Drouet. "You must both go with me to the theater before you go." "Certainly," said Drouet. Carrie?" "I'd like it ever so much," she replied. Hurstwood did his best to see that Carrie won the money. He rejoiced in her success, kept counting her winnings, and finally gathered and put them in her extended hand. They spread a little lunch, at which he served the wine, and afterwards he used fine tact in going. "Now," he said, addressing first Carrie and then Drouet with his eyes, "you must be ready at 7:30. I'll come and get you." They went with him to the door, and there was his cab waiting, its red lamps gleaming cheerfully in the shadow. "Now," he observed to Drouet, with a tone of good fellowship, "when you leave your wife alone, you must let me show her around a little. It will break up her loneliness." "Sure," said Drouet, quite pleased at the attention shown. "You're so kind," observed Carrie. "Not at all," said Hurstwood. "I would want your husband to do as much for me." He smiled and went lightly away. Carrie was thoroughly impressed. She had never come in contact with such grace. As for Drouet, he was equally pleased. "There's a nice man," he remarked to Carrie as they returned to their cozy chamber. "A good friend of mine, too." "He seems to be," said Carrie. End of Chapter 10. Recording by Carrie Bradfield, St. Louis, Missouri. Chapter 11 of Sister Carrie. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carrie Bradfield. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. Chapter 11. The Persuasion of Fashion. Feeling guards o'er its own. Carrie was an apt student of fortune's ways, of fortune's superficialities. Seeing a thing, she would immediately set to inquiring how she would look properly related to it. Be it known that this is not fine feeling, it is not wisdom. The greatest minds are not so afflicted, and, on the contrary, the lowest order of mind is not so disturbed. Fine clothes to her were a vast persuasion. They spoke tenderly and Jesuitically for themselves. When she came within earshot of their pleading, desire in her bent a willing ear. The voice of the so-called inanimate, who shall translate for us the language of the stones? "My dear," said the lace collar she secured from Partridge's, "I fit you beautifully. Don't give me up." "Ah, such little feet," said the leather of the soft new shoes. "How effectively I cover them! What a pity they should ever want my aid." Once these things were in her hand, on her person, she might dream of giving them up. The method by which they came might intrude itself so forcibly that she would ache to be rid of the thought of it, but she would not give them up. Put on the old clothes, that torn pair of shoes, was called to her by her conscience in vain. She could possibly have conquered the fear of hunger and gone back. The thought of hard work and a narrow round of suffering would, under the last pressure of conscience, have yielded, but spoil her appearance? Be old clothed and poor appearing? Never! Drouet heightened her opinion on this, and allied subjects in such a manner as to weaken her power of resisting their influence. It is so easy to do this when the thing opined is in the line of what we desire. In his hearty way he insisted upon her good looks. He looked at her admiringly, and she took it at its full value. Under the circumstances she did not need to carry herself as pretty women do. She picked that knowledge up fast enough for herself. Drouet had a habit, characteristic of his kind, of looking after stylishly dressed or pretty women on the street and remarking upon them. He had just enough of the feminine love of dress to be a good judge, not of intellect, but of clothes. He saw how they set their little feet, how they carried their chins, with what grace and sinuosity they swung their bodies. A dainty, self-conscious swaying of the hips by a woman was to him as alluring as the glint of rare wine to a toper. He would turn and follow the disappearing vision with his eyes. He would thrill as a child with the unhindered passion that was in him. He loved the thing that women love in themselves, grace. At this, their own shrine, he knelt with them, an ardent devotee. "Did you see that woman who went by just now?" he said to Carrie on the first day they took a walk together. "Fine stepper, wasn't she?" Carrie looked and observed the grace commended. "Yes, she is," she returned cheerfully, a little suggestion of possible defect in herself awakening in her mind. If that was so fine, she must look at it more closely. Instinctively she felt a desire to imitate it. Surely she could do that too. When one of her mind sees many things emphasized and re-emphasized and admired, she gathers the logic of it and applies accordingly. Drouet was not shrewd enough to see that this was not tactful. He could not see that it would be better to make her feel that she was competing with herself, not others better than herself. He would not have done it with an older, wiser woman, but in Carrie he saw only the novice. Less clever than she, he was naturally unable to comprehend her sensibility. He went on educating and wounding her, a thing rather foolish in one whose admiration for his pupil and victim was apt to grow. Carrie took the instructions affably. She saw what Drouet liked. In a vague way she saw where he was weak. It lessens a woman's opinion of a man when she learns that his admiration is so pointedly and generously distributed. She sees but one object of supreme compliment in this world, and that is herself. If a man is to succeed with many women, he must be all in all to each. In her own apartments, Carrie saw things which were lessons in the same school. In the same house with her lived an official of one of the theaters, Mr. Frank A. Hale, manager of the Standard, and his wife, a pleasing-looking brunette of 35. They were people of a sort very common in America today, who live respectably from hand to mouth. Hale received a salary of $45 a week. His wife, quite attractive, affected the feeling of youth, and objected to that sort of home life which means the care of a house and the raising of a family. Like Drouet and Carrie, they also occupied 3 rooms on the floor above. Not long after she arrived, Mrs. Hale established social relations with her, and together they went about. For a long time this was her only companionship, and the gossip of the manager's wife formed the medium through which she saw the world. Such trivialities, such praises of wealth, such conventional expressions of morals as sifted through this passive creature's mind, fell upon Carrie, and for the while confused her. On the other hand, her own feelings were a corrective influence. The constant drag to something better was not to be denied. By those things which address the heart was she steadily recalled. In the apartments across the hall were a young girl and her mother. They were from Evansville, Indiana, the wife and daughter of a railroad treasurer. The daughter was here to study music, the mother to keep her company. Carrie did not make their acquaintance, but she saw the daughter coming in and going out. A few times she had seen her at the piano in the parlor, and not infrequently had heard her play. This young woman was particularly dressy for her station, and wore a jeweled ring or two, which flashed upon her white fingers as she played. Now Carrie was affected by music. Her nervous composition responded to certain strains, much as certain strings of a harp vibrate when a corresponding key of a piano is struck. She was delicately molded in sentiment, and answered with vague ruminations to certain wistful chords. They awoke longings for things which she did not have. They caused her to cling closer to things she possessed. One short song the young lady played in a most soulful and tender mood. Carrie heard it through the open door from the parlor below. It was at that hour between afternoon and night when, for the idle, the wanderer, things are apt to take on a wistful aspect. The mind wanders forth on far journeys, and returns with sheaves of withered and departed joys. Carrie sat at her window looking out. Drouet had been away since 10 in the morning. She had amused herself with a walk, a book by Bertha M. Clay which Drouet had left there, though she did not wholly enjoy the latter, and by changing her dress for the evening. Now she sat looking out across the park, as wistful and depressed as the nature which craves variety in life can be under such circumstances. As she contemplated her new state, the strain from the parlor below stole upward. With it her thoughts became colored and enmeshed. She reverted to the things which were best and saddest within the small limit of her experience. She became, for the moment, a repentant. While she was in this mood, Drouet came in, bringing with him an entirely different atmosphere. It was dusk, and Carrie had neglected to light the lamp. The fire in the grate, too, had burned low. "Where are you, Cad?" he said, using a pet name he had given her. "Here," she answered. There was something delicate and lonely in her voice, but he could not hear it. He had not the poetry in him that would seek a woman out under such circumstances and console her for the tragedy of life. Instead, he struck a match and lighted the gas. "Hello!" he exclaimed. "You've been crying." Her eyes were still wet with a few vague tears. "Pshaw," he said, "you don't want to do that." He took her hand, feeling in his good-natured egotism that it was probably lack of his presence which had made her lonely. "Come on now," he went on. "It's all right. Let's waltz a little to that music." He could not have introduced a more incongruous proposition. It made clear to Carrie that he could not sympathize with her. She could not have framed thoughts which would have expressed his defect, or made clear the difference between them, but she felt it. It was his first great mistake. What Drouet said about the girl's grace as she tripped out evenings accompanied by her mother caused Carrie to perceive the nature and value of those little modish ways which women adopt when they would presume to be something. She looked in the mirror and pursed up her lips, accompanying it with a little toss of the head, as she had seen the railroad treasurer's daughter do. She caught up her skirts with an easy swing, for had not Drouet remarked that in her and several others? And Carrie was naturally imitative. She began to get the hang of those little things which the pretty woman who has vanity invariably adopts. In short, her knowledge of grace doubled, and with it her appearance changed. She became a girl of considerable taste. Drouet noticed this. He saw the new bow in her hair and the new way of arranging her locks which she had effected one morning. "You look fine that way, Cad," he said. "Do I?" she replied sweetly. It made her try for other effects that selfsame day. She used her feet less heavily, a thing that was brought about by her attempting to imitate the treasurer's daughter's graceful carriage. How much influence the presence of that young woman in the same house had upon her it would be difficult to say. But because of all these things, when Hurstwood called, he had found a young woman who was much more than the Carrie to whom Drouet had first spoken. The primary defects of dress and manner had passed. She was pretty, graceful, rich in the timidity born of uncertainty, and with a something childlike in her large eyes which captured the fancy of this starched and conventional poser among men. It was the ancient attraction of the fresh for the stale. If there was a touch of appreciation left in him for the bloom and unsophistication which is the charm of youth, it rekindled now. He looked into her pretty face and felt the subtle waves of young life radiating therefrom. In that large clear eye he could see nothing that his blasé nature could understand as guile. The little vanity, if he could have perceived it there, would have touched him as a pleasant thing. "I wonder," he said as he rode away in his cab, "how Drouet came to win her." He gave her credit for feeling superior to Drouet at the first glance. The cab plopped along between the far receding lines of gas lamps on either hand. He folded his gloved hands and saw only the lighted chamber in Carrie's face. He was pondering over the delight of youthful beauty. "I'll have a bouquet for her," he thought. "Drouet won't mind." He never for a moment concealed the fact of her attraction for himself. He troubled himself not at all about Drouet's priority. He was merely floating those gossamer threads of thought, which, like the spiders, he hoped would lay hold somewhere. He did not know, he could not guess what the result would be. A few weeks later, Drouet, in his peregrinations, encountered one of his well-dressed lady acquaintances in Chicago on his return from a short trip to Omaha. He had intended to hurry out to Ogden Place and surprise Carrie, but now he fell into an interesting conversation and soon modified his original intention. "Let's go to dinner," he said, little recking any chance meeting which might trouble his way. "Certainly," said his companion. They visited one of the better restaurants for a social chat. It was 5 in the afternoon when they met. It was 7:30 before the last bone was picked. Drouet was just finishing a little incident he was relating, and his face was expanding into a smile, when Hurstwood's eye caught his own. The latter had come in with several friends, and seeing Drouet and some woman, not Carrie, drew his own conclusion. "Ah, the rascal," he thought, and then, with a touch of righteous sympathy, "That's pretty hard on the little girl." Drouet jumped from one easy thought to another as he caught Hurstwood's eye. He felt but very little misgiving until he saw that Hurstwood was cautiously pretending not to see. Then some of the latter's impression forced itself upon him. He thought of Carrie and their last meeting. By George, he would have to explain this to Hurstwood. Such a chance half-hour with an old friend must not have anything more attached to it than it really warranted. For the first time he was troubled. Here was a moral complication of which he could not possibly get the ends. Hurstwood would laugh at him for being a fickle boy. He would laugh with Hurstwood. Carrie would never hear. His present companion at the table would never know, and yet he could not help feeling that he was getting the worst of it. There was some faint stigma attached, and he was not guilty. He broke up the dinner by becoming dull, and saw his companion on her car. Then he went home. "He hasn't talked to me about any of these later flames," thought Hurstwood to himself. "He thinks I think he cares for the girl out there. He ought not to think I'm knocking around, since I have just introduced him out there," thought Drouet. "I saw you," Hurstwood said genially, the next time Drouet drifted into his polished resort, from which he could not stay away. He raised his forefinger indicatively, as parents do to children. "An old acquaintance of mine that I ran into just as I was coming up from the station," explained Drouet. "She used to be quite a beauty." "Still attracts a little, eh?" returned the other, affecting to jest. "Oh, no," said Drouet. "Just couldn't escape her this time." "How long are you here?" asked Hurstwood. "Only a few days." "You must bring the girl down and take dinner with me," he said. "I'm afraid you keep her cooped up out there. I'll get a box for Joe Jefferson." "Not me," answered the drummer. "Sure, I'll come." This pleased Hurstwood immensely. He gave Drouet no credit for any feelings toward Carrie whatever. He envied him, and now, as he looked at the well-dressed, jolly salesman, whom he so much liked, the gleam of the rival glowed in his eye. He began to size up Drouet from the standpoints of wit and fascination. He began to look to see where he was weak. There was no disputing that, whatever he might think of him as a good fellow, he felt a certain amount of contempt for him as a lover. He could hoodwink him, all right. Why, if he would just let Carrie see one such little incident as that of Thursday, it would settle the matter. He ran on in thought, almost exulting, the while he laughed and chatted, and Drouet felt nothing. He had no power of analyzing the glance and the atmosphere of a man like Hurstwood. He stood and smiled and accepted the invitation, while his friend examined him with the eye of a hawk. The object of this peculiarly involved comedy was not thinking of either. She was busy adjusting her thoughts and feelings to newer conditions, and was not in danger of suffering disturbing pangs from either quarter. One evening Drouet found her dressing herself before the glass. "Cad," he said, catching her, "I believe you're getting vain." "Nothing of the kind," she returned, smiling. "Well, you're mighty pretty," he went on, slipping his arm around her. "Put on that navy blue dress of yours, and I'll take you to the show." "Oh, I've promised Mrs. Hale to go with her to the exposition tonight," she returned apologetically. "You did, eh?" he said, studying the situation abstractedly. "I wouldn't care to go to that myself." "Well, I don't know," answered Carrie, puzzling, but not offering to break her promise in his favor. Just then a knock came at their door, and the maidservant handed a letter in. "He says there's an answer expected," she explained. "It's from Hurstwood," said Drouet, noting the superscription as he tore it open. "You are to come down and see Joe Jefferson with me tonight," it ran in part. "It's my turn, as we agreed the other day. All other bets are off." "Well, what do you say to this?" said Drouet innocently, while Carrie's mind bubbled with favorable replies. "You had better decide, Charlie," she said reservedly. "I guess we had better go, if you can break that engagement upstairs," said Drouet. "Oh, I can," returned Carrie without thinking. Drouet selected writing paper while Carrie went to change her dress. She hardly explained to herself why this latest invitation appealed to her most. "Shall I wear my hair as I did yesterday?" she asked, as she came out with several articles of apparel pending. "Sure," he returned pleasantly. She was relieved to see that he felt nothing. She did not credit her willingness to go to any fascination Hurstwood held for her. It seemed that the combination of Hurstwood, Drouet, and herself was more agreeable than anything else that had been suggested. She arrayed herself most carefully, and they started off, extending excuses upstairs. "I say," said Hurstwood, as they came up the theater lobby, "we are exceedingly charming this evening." Carrie fluttered under his approving glance. "Now then," he said, leading the way up the foyer into the theater. If ever there was dressiness, it was here. It was the personification of the old term spick and span. "Did you ever see Jefferson?" he questioned as he leaned toward Carrie in the box. "I never did," she returned. "He's delightful, delightful," he went on, giving the commonplace rendition of approval which such men know. He sent Drouet after a program, and then discoursed to Carrie concerning Jefferson as he had heard of him. The former was pleased beyond expression, and was really hypnotized by the environment, the trappings of the box, the elegance of her companion. Several times their eyes accidentally met, and then there poured into hers such a flood of feeling as she had never before experienced. She could not for the moment explain it, for in the next glance or the next move of the hand there was seeming indifference, mingled only with the kindest attention. Drouet shared in the conversation, but he was almost dull in comparison. Hurstwood entertained them both, and now it was driven into Carrie's mind that here was a superior man. She instinctively felt that he was stronger and higher, and yet withal so simple. By the end of the third act she was sure that Drouet was only a kindly soul, but otherwise defective. He sank every moment in her estimation by the strong comparison. "I have had such a nice time," said Carrie, when it was all over and they were coming out. Yes, indeed, added Drouet, who was not in the least aware that a battle had been fought and his defenses weakened. He was like the Emperor of China, who sat glorying in himself, unaware that his fairest provinces were being wrested from him. "Well, you have saved me a dreary evening," returned Hurstwood. "Good night." He took Carrie's little hand, and a current of feeling swept from one to the other. "I'm so tired," said Carrie, leaning back in the car when Drouet began to talk. "Well, you rest a little while I smoke," he said, rising, and then he foolishly went to the forward platform of the car and left the game as it stood. End of Chapter 11. Recording by Carrie Bradfield, St. Louis, Missouri.